Karen, blinking.
What did I do wrong? Oh, okay. All right.
You want to use this one instead, Mike? Not use this one?
All right. The first order of business is it working? No. It has a little green light on it.
Is there any way to turn the volume up on it?
Testing.
Put it right, shut your mouth right
The
now.
All
volume's back up.
right. Usually I have a good classroom voice or playground voice, right? All right. All right, the first order of business tonight is 3.02, community input on the code of conduct with the new revisions. With 30 minutes are allotted for this, so if anyone has comments to make about the code of conduct only, please come forward, state your name, and you have up to 3 minutes. Did anyone wish to speak? All right, could we have a motion to close the public hearing?
No. Tracy.
Tracy? Mrs. Pelton, excuse me. Mrs. Pelton. Motion? Yes. We need resolve that the Board of Education does hereby close the public hearing on the code of conduct. We had a motion from Mrs. Pelton, a second from Mrs. Goodman. All right, all those in favor of closing the public hearing? Unanimous, right? 3.04, approval to adopt the code of conduct for the 2016-2017 school year. Right?
Right. Be it resolved that the board hereby adopts the code of conduct for the 2016-2017 school year, a copy of which will be incorporated by reference into the minutes of this meeting, and be it further resolved that the code of conduct shall be disseminated to all staff, students, parents/legal guardians with instructions that the policies and rules therein must be reviewed and adhered to.
Do we have a motion? Mrs. Pelton, second. Mrs. Carab, discussion. Mr. Lumia.
I have a few concerns regarding the code of conduct.
John, microphone.
Can you hear me now? I have a few concerns. Number one, recess. Ms. Patrick gave me a lot of information on recess. Having spoken to the principals as well as teachers, I feel that if a student is really disrupted in the classroom, they should be up to the professionals in that particular school. And I've spoken to several professionals who feel that speaking to them for a short period of time during recess is appropriate. So I think there should be something said to that effect. I want to give the principals the discretion to be able to speak to students who are disrupted on a regular basis. And it doesn't have to be the entire recess. It could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but there should be something. That's my first concern. I don't know if I want to give you all the concerns or give you my code of conduct. Should I go on?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
The second concern is regarding cheating. I noticed that the penalty, first offense, second offense, third offense, fourth offense, is actually 1 through 11. What about giving a kid a 0 for cheating? And if he cheats 3 consecutive times, failure. How can we accept kids cheating on exams and just simply not give the kid a 0? Or consecutive cheating, take the kid out of the class? So that's my second concern. The third concern is Orchard View, the attendance policy of Orchard View. In the past, when Orchard View was first instituted, it ran extremely well. Kids had to apply and had to basically say, look, if they missed, and they had to sign a contract. If they missed 2 classes or 3 classes, I don't recall the actual number, that they will go back to their home school. Right now, the policy says it can't miss up to 20 classes before it could be consideration to be sent back to their home school. I mean, we're spending a great deal of money. To me, it's a privilege. Being at that school is a privilege. And to allow students who are so many absences, to me, it's unacceptable. So I would like to see the number of, the number of absences, excuse, obviously the kid is sick, those are an excuse. Unexcused absence beyond a certain amount, which we can talk about, equals back to the regular, go back to the regular school. And those are the three concerns I have relative to the code of conduct.
Mr. Rubin.
Thank you, Mr. Lumia. Again, I concur with that, but I actually have concerns about the attendance at Orchard View, because we have, the Orchard View, as it's constructed, has three different, excuse me if I'm using the wrong term, tracks. There's one track for 1 year, one track for 2 years, and one track for 3 years. And I think that the attendance policy should be structured specific, in Orchard View, specific to the individual tracks there. Obviously, students in track 1 require different needs than those that might be there on a permanent basis. I'm wondering, I would hope that there could be, at least be consideration given to the three different venues, the three different tracks at the Orchard View School. Thank you.
Mr. Lumia.
One last thing, I'm sorry that I failed to make one last point. So far as the regular schools at either John Jay or Ketchum, so far as when referrals for absences can be given. Suppose a kid misses 5 classes on a given day, all right? Is that the first referral for each class, or is it 5 referrals altogether? Before action is taken, it seems to me, after the 5th referral, so a kid can actually miss 25 classes, and then we get the 5th referral takes place. I mean, it seems to me that we have to be proactive. If a kid misses class, again, unexcused absences, something's got to be done. The parents have to be brought in, and something has to be taken. Otherwise, the kid is not going to be successful. We cannot allow continuous absence, unexcused absence, and expect kids to be successful in their education. That was last time, sorry.
Other comments? Mrs. Goodman.
I was a little unclear, along with Mr. Lumia, about the change on page 30. A student's recess time recess restriction. You're eliminating that a student's recess time may be restricted. That means it's just not mentioned in the code of conduct. Does that mean that it's still, that it's possible? It is still possible, it's just not mentioned as an acceptable disciplinary action?
I'm ready to
Mr.
speak.
Lokema?
Yeah, I'm ready to speak to any topic you like, once you guys are ready, go ahead.
If I can just make the suggestion, because we started with 4 concerns so far from Trustee Lumia, and now Trustee Goodman is speaking. If we can just then get all the concerns first, because that way we may cover them by the time we get to this side of the table, and then we can address them all, as opposed to going back and forth with the dialogue. So now we have 2 questions that I'm recording pertinent to recess, and as we continue with the concerns as we go, then it would be better that way, and then we can go and provide explanation and have the conversation. Would that be okay?
That's fine. All right. If we're going around the table then, Mr. Galetta, did you have any to add?
Mr. Lumia brought up the recess restriction. I would just like some more clarification on that.
Okay, Mrs. Karan?
With the bullying procedure, the only comment that I had, if we could just rephrase the beginning of it, it addresses what a staff member is to do.
That is page,
Only because Ms. Goodman started with the dates now.
Yes, on page 21, we have procedure for dealing with bullying behavior. And while it's very, very important to have the information what a staff member should do, when they suspect this is taking place. Could we preface that possibly with having what a child or student should do if they are subjected to it? I didn't know if I missed it in another part of the code of conduct, whether or not that section directs what a student should do if they actually are subjected to it. Is that something that's covered in the classroom, or?
Well, I thought are we still gathering the concerns?
Well, okay, so that's my concern.
Mr. Sloshow?
Did you want just specific item, and then we'll have further discussion?
Yes, then we're going to have clarification by the administration and then discussion.
Further discussion. All right, a couple of issues, just with regards to recess. One of those concerns, and just for clarification, is why recess is at the end of the day and not right after lunch. And that would lead into continued concerns that I have with regards to PBIS. So perhaps we could get a little explanation with regards to PBIS and the code calendar as well. Then I have a few comments on both of those.
Mrs. Pelkey?
I'm going to wait for Mr. Document's responses because my concerns have already been addressed.
Mrs. LeBlanc?
My comments my concerns are with regard to the continued breakfast that we're giving all students have. We're asking teachers and administrators to evaluate personal biases. That's very subjective. I also think anyone who's following the development and implementation of federal legislation and regulations and state regulations and legislation knows that this is also going to be brought into curriculum because we're going to continue to I guess, develop the attitudes and culture of acceptance with regard to concerns. My problem is we're going to introduce particularly to the young children, not just the question of the subject matter, but from a cognitive development perspective. I'd just like to give an example. A slight blonde Caucasian girl in a kindergarten class could conceivably come in and identifying, because we're considering weight, race, and gender, and say identify as a large black boy. We're going to ask this little 6-year-old girl to recognize that person's perceived identity. Standing next to another slight, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Caucasian little girl and say, that's a girl. How are we going to have this child distinguish between when she's supposed to recognize a little blonde girl as a big black boy, and when she's supposed to recognize a little black girl, a little white girl as a little white girl? Well, it depends on what that little white girl tells you she wants you to acknowledge her as. We're talking about children who are learning tangible facts about the world. So that's how they're going to be told to identify those physical realities. The physical reality is now malleable. What about that red broomstick in the corner? Could it be a green piece of paper? How do I know? Is the little blonde girl who identifies as a big black boy able to say that that's a green piece of paper? Where are the tangible facts that we can explain to these children? Where's their moorings? Where's their grounding? What's the reality? What is physical reality going to be based in for them? Now, if you call that little blonde white girl, a little blonde white girl, and she wants to be identified as a big black boy, you're punished. And if you call that red pole in the corner a green piece of paper, you're left back. This is what we're doing. We're making physical reality a matter of not just her perception, the perception of the person she's referring to. She needs to know what that person wants her to call them, and that's what she is now told she needs to consider as a physical reality. It's going to be chaos. And the more times we just dismiss this conversation, validate the concept in the codes and the policies that we adopt, the further entrenched this is, the further along it moves, this is the reality. Our children need simple, solid facts. And we're not giving them to them. We're asking them to do something it's going to create chaos for them. They can't hold on to physical reality and what they see and touch and observe as real. How are they ever going to learn? I have concerns about ignoring the implications of DASA and continuing to encode it into our policies and decisions.
Mrs. Goodman, additional concerns? Or we're not in discussion yet?
Okay.
We're not, okay. I also have a concern about eliminating recess as a means of discipline. And again, I also wonder, is that still going to be permitted as an elementary school teacher? And having substituted also, I found that taking away a short bit of recess to discuss the behavior is probably the most effective immediate disciplinary measure with children who are just testing you out, as opposed to children with severe behavioral disorders who obviously need another and more extensive approach. And I also, and besides that, I also agree with Mr. Lumia that the cheating issue seems a little strange, because if you cheated, obviously you should get a 0 for it. You may get the opportunity to do some other assignment or take another test, as the case may be, if this felt appropriate. But if you cheated, you should hardly get credit for it. It seems a little strange. All right, so perhaps you could clarify that, or perhaps I misunderstood. Thank you. Are there any other concerns before we ask Mr. Lopima and Mr. Carriel to explain? No?
Which one first?
We'll start off with recess. I think we need to look at recess for our 4th meeting, I believe now, and it's been a conversation that's taken some time, which is good. Before Mr. Lopima will speak, I just want to make clear that in past meetings I did share with the Board of Education that recess is symptomatic. It's not, what we're really talking about is the climate and culture of the school district. And what's the language that we want, and what's the kind of culture that we want to have in our school district. So I did mention at a certain point restorative practice and the work that we will be doing in the school district this school year. I don't think the issue is that recess will not be taken away. I think the issue really becomes the culture that we're trying to promote in the school district. So for example, if we lived our own lives as personal relationships, interpersonal relationships, with constant threats, it wouldn't be too pleasing. So we're not negating that a child, as you indicated, very valid point, I even wrote that, to discuss the behavior that occurred when something might have happened in class. But in terms of looking at it from a classroom management, a cultural, climate and culture perspective, are we teaching in a way where your name goes on the board, and then your name comes off the board, and then your name goes back on the board? And we have had those experiences, I remember them, myself as a student. Or are we teaching more at the level of accountability to say, before you go out to recess, you and I need to have a conversation? So the idea is to really reflect on the behavior, the negative behavior that you're displaying in the classroom, the disruptive behavior that you're displaying outside of the classroom, being disrespectful, bullying a peer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and making sure that we start unfolding those negative behaviors and creating them into positive behaviors, as opposed to really creating that the child is now really saying, I'm losing recess, as opposed to, you know, I call Johnny like tomato head. Sorry, Johnny. You know, and that really, Johnny has an opportunity to be able to say, don't you ever call me a tomato head again. I don't appreciate it. And that's the kind of culture that we're trying to elevate. So not trying to say that children would not have disciplinary outcomes, but the approach that we take to those disciplinary outcomes are extremely important to develop a culture of a level of accountability. So I think, Madam President, you said it best, to discuss those behaviors, to be able to reflect on those behaviors. So how do we want to look at that, and how we write that portrays the kind of culture that we are, which then says, you're losing recess, as opposed to, we need to talk about why you call Johnny a tomato head.
Well, in all due respect, I think that should take place outside the classroom with the principal for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. It's great to create a great culture. There's no question about it. We want to create a positive culture and all that. But at the same time, you can't expect a teacher in front of 25 kids, 28 kids to address that issue in front of at that point. That's why I think it should be sent to the principal, where the principal himself can address that. And it just seemed, the articles that Tracy gave me, I'll just read you a couple paragraphs from articles she gave me. Ultimately, the principal is the most capable of evaluating the role that recess plays in the school day and estimating its true value. Any recommendation regarding recess must be taken into account what principals think, because they're ultimately positioned to replicate best practices. Second thing, despite national recommendations against withholding recess at a majority of U.S. elementary school, teachers still withhold recess for academic or behavioral reasons. The third thing, there are times when taking away recess is logical and a natural response to behavior. Kathy Campbell, the president of the Berkeley Federal Teachers Association, told the school board at a November meeting, we don't want it to be impossible for teachers to use this tool, she said, because there are times when it's absolutely the right tool. The board eventually passed a policy that maintains the ability of teachers to restrict recess time for a maximum of 10 minutes per day after considering other disciplinary alternatives and providing a verbal warning. Nobody on this board wants to take away recess. Nobody on the board, everybody on this board believes the importance of recess. But at the same time, I think the kids have to learn to be respectful and responsible in a classroom. And when that doesn't happen, something has to occur. Whether they take away 10 minutes away, to me, it's worthwhile. And I think the principals would be totally supportive if the board takes that action.
Mrs. Goodman.
Yeah, my issue is that there was nothing in the research that shows that a child is materially harmed by losing a few minutes of recess, or even a whole day's worth of recess. Only very occasionally. If you are continually depriving a child of recess, that child has a bigger problem that a teacher should be trusted to address by either working with the principal or the response to intervention team or looking at academics or discussing it with a parent. I really believe that we need to allow the educational professionals to engage in their profession. And that we should not use a written code to say to teachers and principals that we do not trust you.
I would like to agree with that. Also, I thought that was well put. Thank you. But I'll give you an example. This idea that you should refer children to the principal for every little infraction merely tells the children that the teacher has absolutely no authority. This is especially true when substituting. I substituted for several years, and if I referred a child to the principal in the course of a whole year, it was unusual. Very few wound up in the principal's office because I took care of it right then and there, and it was effective. And usually in elementary school, it is a little recess, losing a little recess time. They learn you mean it, you come back another day, and you don't have the problem because they all saw she means it. If, on the other hand, the other possibility from constant referrals to the principal where their day is taken up by trivia and you know, Johnny called you you a rabbit face or whatever, tomato head, whatever. You know, really, do they have time then to concentrate on the really serious problems? These things should be taken care of then. If, on the other hand, you send home notes all the time on this, the parents, you know, they don't know how serious it was. They weren't there. They're not sure whether they should deprive the child of, ground the child, or whether they should just talk to them or what. They don't know the context. And so they're frustrated. They're not sure what to do with either. This is a very simple and long effective method. And to prescribe things, this code of conduct, for one thing, I think it is far too long and lengthy and detailed. I think, as Mrs. Goodman said, and Mr. Lumia, we're not giving the educational professionals enough leeway to use common sense and within the whole context of this. Yep, who else? Mrs. Hill.
I'd just like to start out by saying I think that there is an innate misunderstanding to punitive and restorative practice. This is, from the perspective that I've taken from day one, this is not about whether or not you're going out for recess. This is about how you treat children and how you empower children. And I have an electric fence for my dogs, and it does keep them in the yard. I wouldn't put one on my children. If I have a child who comes to me in a classroom and says, or it's time to do your work, because this says in the previous statement that recess in its entirety won't be withheld for academic purposes. I'm aware that that means if you don't have your homework to turn in, you could get 10 minutes taken off from recess. So what I'm saying is, it's not about having the ability to use recess time for something. It's about being respectful and empowering children. If I have a child, if I'm a teacher and I have a child who says, I don't have my work to turn in, I would like to say to that child, before you go out to recess, can you jot down why it didn't happen? Because if I know that it's because you needed extra help, or if you didn't have time, or if you had a family situation, and what's your remedy for getting it done before you go out there, I'm empowering you to take control over that. If I'm disruptive and I can't behave around other children, you know what, you're having a hard time. This is something that needs to go to the principal's office. Are you going to do that at recess time, or are you going to do that at flex time? Empowering children to make a better choice. If the answer is always, no matter what you do, 10 minutes off of recess, 30 minutes off of recess, you quickly become the child who's always in trouble, and you get that label in school, and it sticks with you for quite some time. The issue is trying to be restorative. Even our prison system uses restorative behavior nowadays. It's about giving that child a choice to make a better decision. What could I have done better? This is not about recess. It's about empowering our children and teachable years to make better choices. This is what I didn't do. Talk to me about it. What happened? Do I talk to you at flex time? Do I talk to you at recess? Address the issue. It's the electric fence thing for me.
Mrs. Lalone.
I very much appreciated what Mrs. Goodman said. I also think we need to kind of acknowledge the fact that every child doesn't respond to the same, the same way, to the same decision. So, my oldest, if I looked at him sideways, I said jump, and he said how high, and some of the others not so much. I had to stop and think, what is going to motivate her to do what I need for her to do, what she needs to do for herself. So the answer isn't always the same. And it's not the same for every teacher, it's not the same for every student, and things we need to give the teachers the opportunity and the responsibility of looking for what works for these children. We hire professionals that come, that they have to have master's degrees. They're working with children every day. We have professional development. We have principals. If the principal walks around the school and finds that the teacher doesn't have control over class, maybe the teacher needs a little more professional development. Maybe somebody needs to go in and look and see, what the issue is. Is it the teacher? Is it the student? Is it the chemistry? There's just a lot of different things in play here. And I think we need to set boundaries and guidelines and make the suggestions that we need to do to make, but we need to allow for the fact that every child is different, allow for the fact that every teacher is different, and and promote the culture that we like to see.
Mr. Slowshower.
As someone who is not in favor of taking recess away from students for disciplinary measures, some interesting comments by the board this evening. And I'm in agreement with several things that were said. So the question would be is, why do we need a policy in regards to recess at all? If we're going to leave it up to the teachers and the principals in their buildings and to administer what Trustee Pelton said it might be an excellent course of action, or Trustee Lumia said is the proper course of action. Honestly, why are we sitting here debating this? Okay, this is something that we can always bring back up if for some reason it's not working, for whatever the reason is. But if we're going to allow the principals and the teachers to say, listen, so-and-so Johnny, you're not behaving, I need to talk to you for 10 minutes. It can't be done after school, before you run to gym, to lunch, to recess. I don't see why that is a problem. But at the same time, I don't want loss of recess to be utilized by teachers and principals as a true punishment in taking this time away completely. Because that's how I interpreted this policy prior to our recent discussions. You're not acting properly. Loss of recess to me means, it's not 5 minutes, loss of recess means you've lost recess for that particular day or that particular time period. I think we could just simplify this. I don't think we actually need a specific policy with regards to recess. And let each teacher conduct their class the way they feel they should conduct their class. But at the same time, we want to, as Trustee Belton said, we want to give them and empower them to do the right thing. We want a mechanism in place so it's not a habitual behavioral problem on a daily basis. And look, every kid acts out. It could be a one-time thing. We don't want that situation all the time. But at the same token, I mean, there's other things I'd like to discuss about recess, but I don't want them to lose that opportunity for recess because they do need to be outside. They do need to have a break from class. That actually, believe it or not, is an important behavioral component, which I'll discuss briefly when we get to PBIS, is that actually recess and extended recess actually make students have less behavioral problems according to the information that I found. Thank you.
Mrs. Goodman. Oh, wait a minute, Mr. Galetta didn't have a turn yet, so we'll let him talk and then Mrs. Goodman.
So I agree with what Mr. Carrion mentioned earlier and Ms. Pelton about possibly a shift in maybe how we handle behavioral issues. Just because something's been done a certain way for forever doesn't necessarily mean it's right to continue it down the line. You know, maybe the shift is in order. I guess first of all, as a board member, I'm not sure how much involvement, or even as a board, how much involvement we want to get into specific methods of how teachers handle the disciplinary actions in their classrooms, things like that. I'm not sure. But at the same time, I would like to hear what other, you talk about the restorative practices, and I see that is in the code of conduct as the number 2 type level of approach. What other methods, I guess, besides recess restriction that are just as effective, and because the outcome is really the ultimate goal, right? The change in behavior is really the ultimate goal. Right. So how it gets accomplished?
I think everyone has made extremely valid points. I think validating exactly what I said originally, because no one is saying that students will not have recess. What this is saying is, you can't tell me that I can take away recess every day. It's in the code of conduct. I can take away recess every single day. It's in the code of conduct. Everything that everyone said, whether from their own personal children in terms of how you treat different children, you assess the situation, you look and you treat students by what their needs is. When you peel the onion, we don't know why Joey can't do long division. And maybe got really extremely frustrated, and you want to handle the situation by keeping him an extra 10 minutes before he goes out for recess so that you can help him with the homework. No one is saying, listen, you're going to have to sit here and you're going to miss recess. No one is indicating. What we're really saying is the opposite. We're empowering teachers and we're empowering administrators to make the decisions and not to make these blanket statements where it's a one-size-fits-all to indicate your name is on the board and you're going to miss recess. And this is the whole notion. The whole notion is that when you empower the teachers, when you empower the principals to address the situation, that may be a punitive measure for that moment. But it's not that it's black and white across the board. And once you have it there as a number that this is the repercussion you can get, you get that repercussion as many times because that's what we said we can do. So you can't not, as an administrator, tell a teacher, why does he continue to miss recess? Because he can. It's in the code of conduct. So I'm not at all negating the fact that kids will have different disciplinary measures based on what they're displaying, what may be occurring, because we know that they're all different. And what may work for one child may not work for the other. And it is important for as educators that we understand the audience that sits in front of us every single day, where they come from, who their family members are, and work in a collaborative fashion so that we can change disruptive negative behavior. And if one day you miss recess, that's part of the process.
Mrs. Goodman.
This kind of what you said, Superintendent, kind of goes back to my original question. I still have no clarity on what eliminating those two sentences will have on classroom management, teacher freedom, and administrative discretion. I'd like some clarity on what happens now if we take it out. That's all I want to know.
Mr. Lumia?
And consistency. In the past, we've heard comments that different schools deal with recess differently. We heard the comments, yes? There should be some consistency. Whatever that consistency is, there should be one.
I'd just like to say one thing, that although it's very optimistic and to think that a child's misbehavior in class is because he didn't understand long division, and that happens sometimes.
It does.
But I don't deny that, Mr. Carrion, it does happen. But it also happens that Johnny or Mary just likes to see if they can get the teachers, if they get the other kids to laugh, or some other such thing. Now, for instance, running red lights has a penalty in the law. It's a consistent penalty. Perhaps you are running the red light because you're rushing a relative to the hospital. That happens. But most people running red lights are not doing them for such good reasons. The same thing with disruptive behavior in class. It's certainly we take into consideration, I think all teachers take into consideration the different reasons why children do things. And no one's suggesting that a child should regularly lose all their recess. But on the other hand, we have to consider the fact that children and adults do occasionally do things because they can get away with it. And that happens, not unusually. And if they see they can get away with it, more of them do it. And that's just human nature. Like we were saying about the cheating. If you can cheat and get away with it and there isn't a big penalty for it, well, why would you get the 20 that you earned if you see the other kids in the class cheat and it gets forgiven? So, you do have to have some accountability. That's learning about real life.
Absolutely. No one is negating that. I think that's the issue here. No one is negating that. What we're saying is that maybe I agree with Trustee Goodman. Maybe the clarity needs to be in the wording, that people understand what it is that how teachers have the discretion, administrators have the discretion to work with students that are disruptive. There's no way we're going to condone any type of negative or disruptive behavior. But what we need to do is we need to improve upon those behaviors. And if a 10-minute timeout is the only factor that was implemented, and that's the way it's interpreted, then there's no basis, or you have no leg to stand on to argue that we need to change upon those negative behaviors. That's all I'm indicating.
Mr. Rubin.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Carrion, I have to thank you for something. You gave me a nice education earlier this week. You used the term disproportionality, which kind of got me to thinking as I was reading through this. As disproportionality was a concept that we're obliged to operate under New York State law. And as I read this, my feelings are, this code of conduct, that what we're having in here, and maybe it needs to be a little clarified, but we're really, what we're doing here, we're couched within the allowable limits of law. And I don't know if disproportionality enters into this or not, but I think what we're trying to do is make something solid that both teacher and student can use in terms of their interaction during the course of the day.
Any other comments? Yes, Mrs. Phelps.
I would just like to add a couple comments. One is the impact when you answer to a behavior, whether it's missed work, whether it's being disrupted, whether it's talking out of turn, when the consistent reaction from a teacher is you will miss recess. There are a number of, I think one side that has not been discussed here is you have very high achieving students that are never in trouble. And I have seen and witnessed the anxiety levels of these children in the class because they are so fearful if they forget to turn an assignment in, if they forget to have everything, or if they don't have anything perfect, they're going to be humiliated. It is a humiliating experience for these students. Mr. Clutter, you asked about what are other ways to deal with it. You know, as we look at if your work is not done, as I stated before, and is in our new policy, let your teacher, you know, take accountability. Write down on a piece of paper, page 35 ELA, we got home late, or I didn't understand. Can you help me at flex time, or I need an extra day? Because now you're empowering that child to actually get the work done, and the goal is to get the work done. Beyond that, you have, again, having this natural consequence. Actually, you know, that's I believe it's Ridgefield that uses that in their code of conduct. If the answer is always no recess, you're not improving upon the behavior. If the behavior is that you're disruptive or you're being disruptive in the class, in my classrooms, and then pull your desk up here, you get to sit next to me. If you are unable to behave properly around other children, guess what? You don't get to play with them on recess. You get to play in this field over here. You're still going out there, but if you can't behave properly around other children, you don't get to be around them. If you're disruptive in my classroom, you can sit up here next to me. If it's always you did something wrong, I'm going to take away something that you love to do. You did something wrong, I'm going to take it away. We're not empowering children. You need to address what the issue is, help that child accomplish what we're trying to get them to accomplish, and then they can move forward.
I'm sorry to speak again, but since Mrs. Pelton described exactly the kind of child I was, who was very fearful, if the teacher scolded the boy next to me, I was sick to my stomach for the rest of the day. And I was a straight A student, and I wouldn't say boo to a mouse, and if the teacher told me to push a peanut with my nose down the hall, I'd have done it, because I was a very obedient child, at least in school. But I don't think you can really, I don't think you can really judge all children on the basis of extremely, you know, fearful children like I was. I think you have to consider different children. And there are children, that boy whom the teacher yelled at, it rolled off his back like water off a duck, you know. He was used to being scolded. I bet you at home they hit him, so why did he care if the teacher just raised her voice? So, you know, I mean, you have to consider different circumstances with different children. And I think this is why we need to empower the educational professionals to make reasonable choices in the context of the situation and of the child. I know, you know, the idea of, well, let's refer it all to the principal or the parent. My grandson had a year in which he got constant little yellow notes home that he was on yellow because he did something or other. And his mother couldn't figure out what she was supposed to do about it, and neither could I, because we didn't know the context of the situation. And you know, it would have been a lot better if the teacher just said, 5 minutes recess, off your recess, I want to talk to you about this. He didn't seem to know what he did either, which isn't surprising. Kids usually don't tell you what they did wrong. So I think you need to be far more flexible, and we are being flexible by allowing the professionals to make decisions of their own. And I don't think many teachers in our district, at least, just indiscriminately took away recess for everything. There may be some, but again, you know, I don't think that's not my experience in this district. Most of the teachers, I think, were quite judicious in how they used it, and they had good reason in many cases as to why they did it. So again, it's the professional who's there on the scene and knows what's going on. Mrs. Good.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, I still don't have an answer to my question. I don't. Can you give me one? Mr. Lakina, it looks like you're really waiting to tell me something. Can he please? President Cohen, can Mr. Lakina?
Okay, is that all right, Mr. Carroll?
Yeah, sure.
Mr.
That's why he's standing there.
Explain this to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just share, we reconvened after our June 20th meeting and public hearing for the COC. We went back to the Code of Conduct Committee. It was the middle of July. but we were able to get together at least 3 or 4 secondary administrators, 2 elementary administrators, a parent, and so we had a nice mix of people who made up the committee, and we talked about this recess measure, right? So the 3 points we talked about, there was a request for data at that time. We didn't have any official data that specifically talked about how many days a particular child might have lost recess and what the behavioral outcome was for that. But we noted that anecdotally we believe that recess loss due to weather was the greatest factor of all in terms of how many days we were sure, whether it be cold temperatures or rainy days or whatever, kids lost dozens of days in a particular school year. The second thing we talked about most notably was everything you guys are alluding to with regards to restorative practices. The idea that rather than just saying, okay, you just spit on the floor, no recess for you, you are going to now, you're going to talk about, you're going to, that punitive punishment will be replaced with a process by which really just be a technique that, our administrators will receive professional development on next week. That helps involve the student in the process of taking responsibility for the solution to what caused their behavior issue. So that alone, and some of the books that we have assigned for reading will say that that students will respond to that with more holistic approach to why they actually did this, and in many cases we might say, well, just punish me because I don't want to deal with this. It actually helps though correct behavior going forward in the future. The other thing I wanted to mention as part of our discussion was we couldn't find a code of conduct that listed recess as a disciplinary measure anywhere. So why should we be the only one? So taking it out didn't really seem to change anything from the perspective of what other districts may or may not be doing. But using, if recess was the only free non-instructional time, that made the most sense to have a conversation about corrective behavior and a plan for not continuing a pattern of being disruptive or bad behavior towards others, then that made the most sense of using that time as a time for restorative practice. Does it always have to be recess? No. Hopefully we'll be able to provide professional development all the way down to the classroom level, but it's going to take time. To where some of those questioning techniques that come with restorative practices can be employed right there on the spot, or a quick pull aside with the student and the teacher. So it's really just we feel like we're losing it.
So if I'm, Madam Council, have you forced?
Yes, Mrs. Goodman.
Okay. So am I hearing you correctly that simply removing the sentence doesn't remove discretion from teachers or administrators? Am I correct about that?
Yes,
That's what matters to me right now.
Yes, but with the idea though that we should not be quick to take something away without some sort of corrective course of action. So not just being, if someone says, to Tracy's examples, you didn't do your homework, you're going to give me that time back. Well, we don't want to do it for academic purposes or whatever. It doesn't always have to. It's not going to be the cookie cutter. This is your discipline. This is what's going to happen. If it's part of a process, then yes.
I need to say this, okay? Teachers are not perfect, but as a teacher myself, I am in awe of their discipline and their caring for children. And to me, this entire discussion of, well, we don't want teachers doing that, is quite frankly insulting to teachers. It just is, okay? If you want teachers approaching students in a specific way, then you train them. Maybe what you also want to do is document, have teachers document who has lost recess on what day. So you can collect the data and also, quite frankly, start to look at the data and see if there is any racial or socioeconomic disproportionality going on in the loss of recess. Or see what the pattern is with the student doing recess. But until you have the data that shows that an individual teacher is not handling her students or his students well, because he automatically and immediately applies recess without thought or care for the child until you can demonstrate that with data, then I'd rather not hear that as reasoning. Sorry.
Number 4, if I may say on page 29,
Yeah.
says loss of privileges. So when you look at page 29, no one is negating anything that anyone has said around this table. I think what the opposite is that we're putting more restriction by identifying one source of saying this is what's going to happen if you behave this way. So number 29, when you look at disciplinary warning, restorative practices, parent-guardian meeting, loss of privileges, that is talking about the educator's discretion. And the list goes on, but also in that respect, it goes back to everything that you've indicated, that everyone else has indicated. Ooh, what's going on with Paul? What's been happening with Paul? So that's no one has negated anything that we're talking about. We have a responsibility. This is the administrative component that we set, and we indicated that our goal is to bring restorative practice. And that is the work that we're doing this year as we continue to work with teachers and we continue to work with administrators. But nothing here has indicated, it says loss of privileges, which is a difference to say, why is it that Paul continues to lose recess day after day, and have that conversation and be able to have that conversation, and let's see what we can do different for Paul now. Whereas to say this will happen, then this is what happens. You can't then go against the code of conduct. So the loss of privileges is indicated there, which gives the teacher and the administrator the discretion to work under this capacity.
That's all I care about.
If that's what that means, I go along with it. First of all, is recess a privilege?
Yeah, should-
That's a good question, actually.
Is recess a privilege?
Well, then if it isn't, then why would it be listed?
As long as your interpretation is that way, I'm in favor. As long as the teacher is given a discretion, I'm in favor.
I also have a question here for substitute teachers. As it is, we have a problem getting substitutes. I personally found when I was substituting, I taught the class the lesson they would have, and therefore I was requested quite a bit, because they knew the class I would teach the lesson. The teacher would not lose time. They came back, they had learned what they were supposed to learn on that day. And I didn't show movies, and I didn't do anything other than what the regular teacher would have done, and they left the plans accordingly. But part of it was because I did have good enough discipline. And if I came into a class, and as happens, not all classes, depends on the class you have, but occasionally you'd have a class where they thought it was, oh, let's get the sub. And I'm sure every one of you have sometime in your school career said, oh, give me a sub, you know, uh-oh. Okay, so yeah, you know, okay, that happens. So they say, oh yeah, well, he'll do something over there distracting, and while the substitute's talking to him, the one over there will do something, and you know, that sort of thing. Well, you could nip that very quickly in the bud by just taking 5 minutes recess off each one who did it like that. And whoops, all of a sudden they start catching on, they're not getting away with it. And so some of them lost 5 minutes, some 10, maybe 1 or 2 in college was lost 15 or 20. But the next time you came in, I didn't have any of that. And they saw, oh, here she is, it's a regular school day, we're doing the lesson, we're not going to get to fool around because something like that would happen. Now, if a substitute has to detail all of this and justify her or himself to the principal because they took away this, obviously they're not going to be able to use that method, and so what are they going to do? They're going to write a whole bunch of referrals, send all these kids down to the office? Really? I mean, what you're saying is you're taking away something that's very effective and works very you know, immediately, it gets everybody back in the idea, oh, this is a regular school day,
Who's
yeah.
taking it away?
Well, that's what I'm saying, if you
It's on
make
page
this a big
29,
thing, you have to.
loss of privilege.
Yes,
So-
but
Okay.
loss of privilege, you have to document it to the principal? Yeah.
Are we now discussing recess is a privilege
Yeah.
or it's a right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's backtrack just for a second, okay? Excellent points, as I mentioned before. Why is it, if there's a discipline problem and ding, 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 it's recess time, hey, Johnny, can you come here for a second? Why isn't the teacher just, Johnny, come here for a second, and explaining to the child, why does it have to be explained to the child, loss of recess? Ask the child, wait, come here for 5 minutes. I mean, countless times, kids run to gym when the teacher says, Johnny, can I speak with you for a second before you go to gym? If there is a discipline problem, the teacher can explain, I'm not happy with your behavior, please don't do it anymore. If it's a problem, I'm gonna have to talk to the principal, your parent, whatever. Or, as Trustee Pelton's suggestion was, if there was an issue with something. Because now I'm hearing we're using loss of recess because the child didn't do an assignment and is being punished for academic reasons. So I hope we're not even going anywhere near
Hearing from whom?
that
From whom? I
standpoint.
don't think anyone on the board said that.
I'm not saying anybody did. I'm just stating that an example that Ms. Pelton gave, if there's a discipline, an assignment wasn't done, we're looking for a positive way to empower the student. I don't know why we're going through the whole process. If a child is misbehaving, the teacher should call the kid aside at any point during the day and explain and talk to the child and
You
say
haven't been
what
in
is
a classroom
going
if that's
on.
what you think.
Okay,
You have not been in a classroom if that's what you think.
okay. I'm not getting into a debate with you,
Mr. Lumia.
Ms. Goodman.
Sorry.
I'm just stating,
The elementary
I'm just
school
stating
teachers-
a point. Mr. Lumia, I
I'm sorry,
wasn't
I'm
finished.
sorry.
Just give me 1 second. As I said, everybody makes some valid points, okay? But I don't see, what is that issue? It's not loss of recess. Why are we even calling it a loss of recess? If the child is misbehaving and the teacher feels the need to speak to that child, and that's the appropriate time to pull the child aside for 5 minutes, then have that conversation with the child, and then have the child go back to doing whatever, whether it's recess or whatever else that they have to do. Why are we indicating it as a loss of recess, specifically saying to the child, you're gonna lose recess
As a penalty.
as a penalty?
Mr. Lumia.
Does the teacher at the elementary school level accompany the kids to recess, yes or no?
Yes.
Now, I'm gonna be talking to the kid prior to recess. Who accompanies the other kids?
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, let's talk about homework, okay? We talked about homework as a punishment and so forth. First of all, I don't think it should be a punishment. However, I suppose you have a consistency of a kid who never does homework ever. You call the parents, and the kid still does them. What do you do? How are you gonna get a restorative practice? What are you gonna do? You keep him after school, you can say, look, you stay after school, and I'll help you do the homework. What do you do? It seems to me the teacher has gotta be given a discretion as to what he or she can do to best help that kid.
I'm not disputing what you just said, and if you know what, when they take the kids outside for recess, Johnny, come here for a second while the kids run off, okay? And talk to
Let
the
me just
student
think
for
what
5
happened
minutes.
at Rossi, not Ketchum, but Myers Corners Road, when that happened one time. Was a kid, the teacher took the kid aside, in the meantime, some kid on the swing got really seriously hurt. You have to supervise when you're out there. You can't be talking to one individual kid when you got 30 kids to supervise, and to keep your eyes open.
With the physical claim, there's 5 teachers standing out there watching all of the kids. If they say, listen, if I'm speaking with this kid, can you keep an eye on everybody? I'm sure the teachers would work together for something like that. I mean, we're really going, beating a dead horse and
Yeah.
different things here, to be honest with
Well,
everybody.
I don't think we are, because we're talking about, for instance, you said take them aside anytime during the day. During the day, you're teaching. You're
If it's
teaching math, you're
if it's
teaching
available,
English.
if the time is
Well,
available.
and the time that you do have when they're doing seat work or something, you're helping them academically. If you're taking that time to discuss a discipline problem with a child, what you're doing is taking away tutoring time with the child who needs a little more help with long division or sentence structure.
I went to school, teacher took the students outside of the classroom for 2 minutes to talk to them.
You're not allowed to leave the class unaccompanied anymore. Yes, Mr. Rubin.
Thank you. Mr. Lukema or Mr. Carrion, on the back page of this, there's a signature page. What happens if, do you get this back from every single student? And if not, what happens to the families and the students who don't send this back? Are they not obliged to follow this? Are we not obliged to follow that with them because this is co-signed?
No, I asked a similar question. They, surprisingly, the principals said that they do collect this, and just about everyone does. One principal in particular said, you know, if they don't, they'll hound the particular parent until they get it. What's interesting is, you know, we don't have to actually have that form. But legally, if something were to come up, legally if something were to come up and it was a disciplinary issue or there was a liability issue, it would be easier for our attorneys to say, well, you obviously, you reviewed the code of conduct because you signed the form, and therefore, that would assist in some conversations. So, does it have to be in there? No, but to my surprise, the principals all prefer that it be in there because they said every now and again it kind of helps.
Well, I have no problem with the kid.
Basically, in a less extreme example, if someone says, well, I didn't know my kid couldn't do that, or how dare you do this or this or whatever, they say, well, we all reviewed the code of conduct and that kind of thing.
The question is not about the kids and families who send this back, it's about the ones who do not. I can't see, since it's not a legal requirement that we have it, there should be no legal requirement that we're able to enforce not.
We can have a requirement whereby refuse to sign it. So at least we know that we're given the opportunity to review it. They don't want to review it, at least we have something that said, look, it's available, and we refuse.
That's basically it.
Mrs. Good.
Okay, so I have a question, I guess, for either the superintendent or for Mr. Wakima, which is, am I correct in saying that if we delete this sentence, or those two sentences, that teachers will still be able to exercise discretion in handling their students?
Yes.
Okay. Will they be informed that this change in the code of conduct, because I'd be willing to bet that some teachers will notice, will they be informed that it doesn't change their discretion?
This sentence does not exist in 1516 code of conduct.
It doesn't.
The reason why it's here as a revision is because when I edited this document with the committee in April, I tried to put it back in. Sorry. So we went through all 1516 without the sentence.
Okay, and the teachers were fine, and that's fine, then I'm fine. Thank you.
You said you tried to put it back in, and why were you putting it back in? Because people had
The
suggested.
principals requested it all.
The principals requested.
And I've had teachers stop me in the hallway saying, please put it back in. But
So
under the guise,
teachers and principals wanted this
but not-
in.
Yes, but not to rehash it, but to reiterate it with the idea of a restorative practice approach, I think will satisfy both the needs of the student as well as the behavioral concerns of the classroom.
But we do know then that principals and teachers wanted it.
The most creative.
Professionals in the who deal with.
Yeah, there's a couple of creative ways that the staff has gone about going around it. The most notable would be that they would just call the parents and say, hey, it's not in our code of conduct, but I want to restrict recess for the issue, and the parent agreed, and they would do it.
Okay, well then we
Which
get
is an
into the
extra step.
interesting situation where Johnny, Mike, and Joey and Susie's parents said, no, you can't take away their recess. So you mean you're going to take away the others? Well, those three kids, you'd say, ha, the teacher's not allowed to take away my recess. This sort of gets into the situation that schools who have tried to institute a uniform policy have found that as long as there's an opt-out, then the children who can get their parents to opt them out, immediately, push this with the other children. So it seems making the whole policy, totally useless.
Well, I would just share again that I could not find another code of conduct which lists this as a disciplinary measure and our area we're beyond.
Yeah, but some of our principals and teachers felt it should be there.
But we're going to work with our principals next week.
Because the
on different
interpretation,
strategies.
the interpretation was that they couldn't take it away. That was the interpretation. The whole thing is, it's based on working with your students, with your audience, and ensuring. No one is saying that things will not be taken away from students. I mean, no one is indicating that whatsoever. And I think it goes back to what Trustee Goodman said at the very beginning. Maybe we just need to make the clarity of the wording to ensure that. But do remember, when there is a code of conduct, for example, and students have an altercation, there's a series of steps that you can have. You can go directly to suspension, and maybe you don't go directly to suspension. So the idea is that you take, as we all indicated, our audience case by case, and we use our professional judgment and our experiences and who our audience is to make the determination. Therefore, I think what happened was that when it was not in the code of conduct, it was perceived that it was something that cannot be done because that's the way we understood it. But I think no one is indicating. Therefore, when a child gets suspended for fighting, it may not happen in another school the same way. It may not happen for two individuals the same way. But overall, you have discretion. So teachers working together with administrators and understanding what's going on with students, that's not going away. And I don't think that's the whole point. But getting to the deeper issue with the restorative practice is what it is. However we want to look at this, no one has said, can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. That would be just tying up all of our hands. It's just a matter of being able to use your judgment to be able to understand how it is that you're going to work with students, as you indicated. 7 children and different situations with different students, repercussions.
All right, Mr. Galetta.
I think we're getting close to maybe wrapping this up, I'm not sure, but I would ask that if we think there's going to be further discussion on this tonight, I would make a motion that we limit further discussion to a maximum of 5 more minutes before we go on to another topic. I'm open to an amendment for 10 minutes, but I think we're getting close to it.
I'll second.
Okay. All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Abstained? All right, Mrs. Good.
I think I may have the sentence that will solve the problem. How about if we say recess restriction, teachers, yes, I'm on the very first page, where it says page 30, where it says a student's recess time may be restricted either in whole or in part. Why don't we change that to read, educators have the right to ask students to spend their recess time in whatever restorative discipline practices they feel necessary.
Do we have is that an amendment?
I'll move to amend the code of conduct that way.
Okay, do we have a second? Mr. Lumia. All right, it's been moved and seconded. We need a vote before we discuss. We need discussion now and then the vote. So is there any discussion to the amendment? We're discussing the amendment.
Sure.
Okay.
Teachers and administrators have the right to ask students to use their recess time in whatever, in restorative discipline practices as they see fit.
Mr. Rubin.
Do they not have that?
Ms. Goodman, do you mean to say to ask the student? That would seem to apply to the student, and say now what to tell the student. Or require.
Require, yes.
Okay.
They require the
You
student.
would say require,
Right.
actually.
Yes. You go along with that, Mr. Loomis, as you said? Okay, so amended to review. Yes, Mrs. Belton, discussion.
One of the purposes of restorative practice is to put the focus on the behavior that was not acceptable, and that's the reason for not associating recess with bad behaviors.
All right, Mr. Galetta?
I would ask that, is it not implied that what you said is already
That's what I
kind of
thought.
implied
but-
as well?
But then Mr. Lakima said that staff was under the impression that they no longer had access to that form of discipline because it was no longer in the code of conduct. So I agree with you, your statement that it's not in other codes of conduct is certainly valid. So we need to do one of two things. We need to either put some language back in the code of conduct that gives the teachers the right to use loss of recess appropriately. Or we need to communicate to teachers more specifically that they still have that right. One of the two.
Yeah, I think this, by putting this in the code of conduct, we make it clear that they do have that right, since the principals and teachers were concerned about having that taken away. Yes, Mrs. Carruthers.
Yes, I am not in favor, if the code of conduct has existed without reference to recess, I think we're going in the wrong direction. We need to move forward with the way that, as we all agree, the way that any type of disciplinary measures get handled during class time or during the time during the school day. The front page of the Code of Conduct, for page 30, says that this sentence was eliminated, and I would rather the Code of Conduct stay silent on recess. I'd rather this be approached building by building, working with the teachers, and some of the things that Mrs. Goodman had mentioned prior, about 10, 15 minutes ago, where it's documented how much it's being used. I don't want to see it included. It hasn't been included. I don't see that we have any reason to, roll back to an area, to inviting more use rather than less
Okay,
of taking recess away.
Did anyone have anything else to say before we vote on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment? All right, in favor, is your hand up, Mr. Lumia? In favor of the amendment, Mrs. Goodman, Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Kelland? Opposed? Mr. Galetta, Mr. Rubin, Mrs. Laval, Mrs. Pelton, Mr. Sloshower, and Mrs. Carruth. The amendment failed. Are we ready to vote on the code of conduct, or do we wish to discuss more?
One question.
Yes, Mr. Sloshower.
Just for clarity purposes. Mr. Lokima, could I just get an explanation, or just for the board, an explanation, why recess is at the end of the day and not after lunch? Is there a specific reason that that's set up that way?
I can't just believe that that's true for all, that's not true for all grade levels, or, it's all part of the schedule.
It's all staggered throughout the course of the day? For elementary school?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just one thought, it's been shown that children eat more of their lunch if they have recess before lunch. So it seems as though the best place for recess would be before the lunch period. And so if lunch and recess are usually around the same time, which they usually are, perhaps this could be addressed in the schools, that they try, if wherever possible, to have recess prior to lunch rather than after it. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Are we ready to vote on the code of conduct?
So,
Or do we have other questions?
Other questions.
Other questions of the cheating?
Yeah, there's
Okay,
cheating,
right,
OV
okay.
attendance.
All right, fine, cheating.
I refer you to page 12 for cheating. I can read it. Would you like me to read it?
this listed as part of the matrix that you have.
Yeah, the matrix thing was kind of strange. It was, in the 15-16 code, it's kind of a mess, right? So we had, on page 10 and 11, there was a lot of text describing disciplinary measures and what violation would equal what discipline. And there was also a table, which is on page 52, or 50, on the 15-16 code of conduct, right? So we, as a committee, agreed that most people in the room, as far as administrators, and there were a lot, said we usually refer to the table. So we decided to clean up the disciplinary measures, eliminate the text, most of it was redundant and not even in sync with what the measures really should have aligned to. Got rid of the text, just focused on the table. And we kept all the pieces in there, including cheating, and just had a little breakout session, and everyone ranked what the disciplinary measure should be relative to the list of 1 to 16 disciplinary items that are now on page 29, starting at 29 and 30. So all they did was they took what was in that list of disciplinary measures, of which giving a 0 to a student for an assignment was not listed, and applied that, to the table. And again, in the table, and I'll paraphrase without flipping to it, does have in there that, things that are not, certain things are have the discretion of the principal or the building administrator on certain situations. But specifically though, since it's on page 12, you could, we can use that if that was necessary. And I'm sure that that's a more common practice anyway.
I agree, but the point is, when do we remove a student from a classroom repeating cheating?
Well, I would, if it's too difficult to, theorize which way this could go, I would recommend maybe eliminating the whole line for cheating in that table. Because again, there's text in there that says if there's something not listed in this table, then it's at the discretion of the administrator. I could not think of a situation where we had cheating result in a suspension, so I mean.
That has resulted in a suspension.
I can't think of one.
This
That has. Mr. Sedgwick.
It typically does.
I'm not aware.
I was just eliminate it altogether and just refer to
The narrative?
The narrative.
Yeah.
And I would add to the narrative, repeated cheating will lead to possible removal from a class. I would put that in the
Or just reference the page, leave that part of the chart blank, and just reference page 12.
But at the same time, I would add to page 12 another sentence. Repeated cheating will result in classroom removal from the class. Look, it just seems to me, the kids have to be responsible. We cannot condone repeated cheating. There'll still be a lot to, if I was in a classroom teacher, thank God that didn't occur. At least I don't think it did. But if I knew that kid, and I apologize, there was one instance where a kid I knew cheated. How did I know? He never got 100 before, so when the next class he got 100, told the kid, the student, go right to the board and do problem number 1 for me. And guess what? He couldn't do problem number 1. I said, do problem number 2. Couldn't do problem number 2. He knew how I felt about cheating. The next class he would do for my class.
If I may suggest that we keep cheating on the chart, the spreadsheet, and maybe merge that to indicate that, or in the narrative, that the first, second, third, or fourth offense does not apply to this.
In terms of what I guess what I'm trying to get at is, if you're cheating on a Regents exam, the penalty, if you threw a paper to your classmate to say, give me the answer, write the answer for number 12, those are, you can't look at it as first offense. So cheating is really looking at what kind of cheating took place. So instead of maybe looking at it progressively, is that we word that we have to look at the type of cheating that occurred to provide the penalty. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because if I blatantly cheat on something that was major for my final exam, or my final project, and it's a half semester course, it's not 1 through 11.
I cannot distinguish. Cheating to me is cheating, whether it's a major project, major test, cheating is cheating. When I give a test in my class, I expect all my students to do this, not to cheat. To me, it's a serious offense.
No, I get it, that's what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying to you is, but if I throw a paper, I never got to cheat. I just threw you, John, hook me up with question number 13, answer 13, right, I attempted, that's still cheating. But that doesn't mean that I'm gonna go through a superintendent's.
In other words, if you're the receiver, that's cheating.
No, I'm just indicating, I'm validating what you're saying. What you're saying is that taking away the first, second, third, fourth offense as just making sure that you address each cheating situation as it occurred. So someone may go directly to a 3214. Dr. Bond, it usually...
Generally, the way, when I was formerly principal at John Jay, the first offense for cheating was a 0. The second offense would then be disciplinary action, and the third offense would be a suspension. And that was the way it was handled a couple of years ago. That I can speak to.
Did they ever leave for removal for a class?
I don't believe we ever got past the third one. I think the suspension pretty much made the difference. And we didn't have many that got to 3. We had a couple that got to 2. But usually by the second time, they understood that cheating was a serious offense and it was not done on.
Since we reviewed the document annually, can I just make a note of it? If it's not something that, we're willing to approve it as is, that we review it with the committee for the 17-18 school year if we had a better course of, a sense of what the normal typical course of action is in each building for offenses of cheating and how many.
I have a suggestion about that. I just noticed that excessive misconduct is on the following page. It's also in the chart. If we could have language with cheating in the chart that references page 12 with the description of what happens, and then goes on to say that multiple offenses will be treated as excessive misconduct, then it moves it to another level of wrongdoing, which is, down below in the chart with its own set of offenses, with its own set of penalties.
So we have to point to page 12 first, and then
If you're going to merge that section of the spreadsheet, it's just, it doesn't really fall in the same stream of the offenses and infractions that are there, except for disorderly conduct. So any multiple offenses for cheating, disorderly conduct, really moves fighting. They all move to excessive misconduct in a sense. It kind of would be more concise to treat multiple offenses of those infractions as excessive misconduct, and then apply the disciplinary action towards that. So, but I want to make the point that this code of conduct is a fluid document. We can improve on it. I'm not making excuses for what we're going to leave remaining in the code, but it's a fluid document. We can make improvements every year on this. And the committee has made great improvements over last year's. So, on the face of it, to take, let's keep the big picture here. We are moving in the right direction with this code.
Mrs. Lalonde.
I just would like to clarify, Mr. Carrion's comment. Did you intend to say that there were some cheating instances that were big enough to say, go directly? Like we can measure the magnitude of a cheating occurrence, that we don't need to wait for them to get 3 strikes. They could pretty much.
Yeah, for example, the Regency.
Right.
So why
So we
would we
wanna
make
take the number
distinctions?
as,
Why would we make distinctions to what happens?
Goes back to what Trustee Goodman and what everyone was indicating in terms of the educators. Why would we make
evaluate the
distinct,
magnitude of the
right,
offense.
let the educator place value to what it is that's happening.
For example, even with the Regents exam, you walk in with a cell phone, you're done.
Right.
And we repeated,
Share with them, any electronic devices, please leave them at the door.
So I think that, take for example, the Regents exam.
So your reference is
So-
to being able to make a determination of the magnitude of the offense and the response to it, which we don't necessarily want. We don't want to limit ourselves, right?
Exactly, and that, so what I was just trying to recommend for the code of conduct is that the first, second, third, fourth offense for this case is not progressive.
Right.
Because there may be a situation where somebody hacks into somebody else's computer, it's a crime. And we're gonna go 1 through 11? No, we're gonna have to do something that requires that we support this also being taken to the police agency as well as being a crime. So there's all types of cheating that goes on in the 21st century that didn't exist. And we have to ensure that we are able to we have control over making sure that we take the right course of action and the right course of disciplinary action in terms of the offense. So I would suggest somehow or somewhere to kind of indicate that in that narrative that the progressive aspect of dealing with cheating may not apply, and other measures can be taken, or more severe measures can be taken. So it's not progressive. If somebody hacks into a teacher's account and gets every teacher's unit exam for the year, is that going to go 1 through 11 first?
Mr. Rubin.
Madam President, I'd like to call the question.
Of the code of conduct, or to just this point that we're discussing?
The code.
Okay, well then, that doesn't call the question, we just vote on that. Isn't that correct? Isn't that correct, Mrs.
Hold on
Baker?
a
We
second,
barely
hold on
vote
a
on that.
second.
Okay. Right? Doesn't require a second, does it? We just vote on it? Okay. All right, all those would like to now vote on the code of conduct, please raise your hand. Mrs. Lavelle, Mrs. Pelton, Mr. Galetta, Mrs. Goodman, Mr. Rubin. Those who want further discussion, don't want to call the question. Mr. Sloshower, Mrs. Karam, Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Kelly. It passed to call the question. All right, on the code of conduct. All those in, did we previously move it? We did. Yes. All done. All right. All those in favor of the code of conduct, please raise your hand. Mrs. Pelton, Mrs. Karam, Mr. Rubin, Mrs. Goodman, Mr. Galetta. Those opposed? Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Laval, Mr. Sloshower, Mrs. Kelly. The motion passes. Let's see if we can make an adjustment to the agenda. Okay. We would, could I have a motion to adjust the agenda so that we can do the consent agenda now because we have a number of people waiting to be approved, and they've been waiting a long time, and this meeting may well go quite late.
I'll
So,
make that motion.
Mr. Lumia made the motion. Do we have a second? Mrs. Good. All those in favor of so amending the agenda? Unanimous. All right. Consent agenda. All right. Is there anyone who wishes to pull anything from the consent agenda?
Here we go.
Okay. 8.01. We're doing the consent agenda, then we'll go back.
No pulling, right?
No, nothing was pulled.
Okay, resolved that the Board of Education does hereby approve the following consent agenda items as stated. 8.02, 8.03, 8.04, 8.05, 8.06, 8.07, 8.08, 8.09, 8.10, 8.11, 8.12, 8.13, 8.14, 8.15, and 8.16.
Okay, do we have a motion? Mr. Lumia, second. Mr. Sloshower, all those in favor? Unanimous. Yes. Dr. Bonk is going to introduce some of our new employees who were just approved.
Thank you and good evening, Superintendent and members of the Board of Education. I'm very, very pleased to welcome a number of individuals who are with us this evening to the Wappinger Central School District. First of all, teacher Mrs. Syed, could you please stand up? Welcome to Wappinger. Another teacher, Ms. Oppenheim. Ms. Oppenheim, could you please stand up? Administrators, Assistant Principal, Van Wyck Junior High School, Ms. Michelle Kaprinsky. Could you please stand up? Assistant Director of Special Education, Ms. Connie Hayes. Ms. Hayes, could you please stand up? Former Assistant Director of Special Education, now Assistant Principal of Roy C. Ketchum High School, Ms. Shante Brooks. And we conclude with our new Assistant Director of Interscholastic Athletics, Ms. Maureen Myers. Ms. Myers, thank you and welcome to
Welcome, and we hope you all have a long and happy and successful career in Washington. Thank you. All right. 4.01, community input on the Smart Schools Bond Act Implementation Plan number 2. This again is a public hearing. 30 minutes is allotted, and each person may speak with a maximum of 3 minutes. Please come forward to the microphone, state your name, and speak only on this particular subject at this time. Is there anyone who would like to speak about the Smart School Bonds Act Implementation Plan number 2? It's getting late. Anyone? All right. Then could we have a motion to close the public hearing? Resolved that the Board of Education does hereby close the public hearing on the Smart School Bond Act Implementation number 2. Do we have a motion? Mr. Rubin, second. Mr. Lumia, all those in favor? Unanimous. All right, 4.03, approval of the Smart Schools Bond Act Implementation Plan number 2.
For 15 minutes.
Yes, maximum. All right.
Be it resolved that the Wappinger Central School District has developed the Smart Schools Bond Act Implementation Plan number 2, has presented the plan to the board on June 20, 2016, has advertised for public input on the district's website for 30 days, and conducted a public hearing on August 15, 2016. And therefore be it resolved that the Wappinger Board of Education hereby approves the Smart Schools Bond Act Implementation Plan number 2 as presented. And be it further resolved that the Wappinger's Board of Education hereby authorizes the superintendent of schools or his designee to submit the Wappinger Central School District Smart Schools Bond Act Implementation Plan Number 2 to the New York State Education Department for review and approval.
Do we have a motion? Mr. Sloshower, second. Mrs. Pelton, discussion. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Mrs. Goodman.
I just want to comment on the fact that I think that Wappingers is doing a wonderful job in making sure that students and teachers have access to technology.
Anyone else? All those in favor of approval of the Smart Schools Bond Act Implementation Plan Number 2? Mr. Galetta, Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Goodman, Mr. Rubin, Mrs. Pelton, Mr. Sloshower, Mrs. Karat, and Mrs. Keller. Opposed? Mrs. Laval.
Anybody abstain?
That was everybody.
Okay.
5.01, public comments on agenda items. Okay. This is another 30 minutes is allocated to this public comment time. Please limit comments to 3 minutes at the microphone. The public comment period is a time slot set aside on the agenda for citizens to address the Board of Education. The Open Meetings Law does not require that citizens be allowed to participate and speak at Board of Education meetings other than public hearings. The law specifies that the public has a right to attend board meetings, except for executive sessions. The procedure for public comment is outlined in Board Policy Number 1230, Citizen Participation. A total of 30 minutes is set aside for public comment at the beginning and end of the meeting. The maximum time allowed for any one speaker is 3 minutes. Public comments at the beginning of the meeting are limited to items on the agenda. Persons who wish to participate in the public comment portion of the meeting must state their name and the specific topic about which they wish to speak. As speakers must limit comments to issues appropriate for public discussion, compliments or complaints about student discipline, specific student issues, or personnel must not be addressed during public comment. Interruption of board discussion is not permitted. In the interest of civility and respect for different points of view, outbursts from the audience, applause, or other types of disturbances or disruptions are not permitted. Under no circumstances will booing be tolerated. The Board of Education recognizes its responsibility to hear and respond to public comment. As stated in Board Policy Number 1230, the Board is not able to answer questions at the meetings, but welcomes your statements. Any questions from the public should be submitted through the use of the public comment form, which may be obtained online or at the desk with the district clerk. Responses will be provided within 2 business days on the district's public comment responses page so that everyone may receive the information. Does anyone wish to speak on an agenda item? Seeing no one, we will move on to 5.02, communications announcements received by the Board of Education. We will start over there, Mrs. Laval. Mrs. Pelton.
Quickly, the policy meeting was able to meet last Wednesday. We have had a series of the 4,000 policies going through administration. A lot of it is curriculum-based, and we have several policies in tonight's agenda for our first read. If there are any questions or concerns on any of the first read policies, please send an email. We are actively working on our attendance policy as well.
Mr. Sloshow.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I would like to acknowledge the efforts of the Wappingers Congress of Teachers. I received a memo that we all did. The Wappingers Congress of Teachers has what's called a local action project, LAP. 21,000 books were received today through their efforts to be given out to stock school libraries throughout the district. So I would just like to I would just like to recognize that particular committee, Kate DeGroat, Pasquale Della Carpini, Diane Chiria, pronounced that right, I apologize for that, Rena Finsmith, Jim Marin, and Terry Roger. I think that's a tremendous effort, and anytime we can get books donated is always a good thing. On another very happy note, not everyone has read the fourth page of the Poughkeepsie Journal or the Southern Dutchess News the last couple of days, but I would like to acknowledge the efforts of one of our students, a 10th grader, who would have been starting at John Jay this September. Unfortunately, she will not be able to attend school at John Jay because she was selected as one of only 12 girls in the entire country to try out for the U.S. Olympic aerial ski team. That would be Ms. Katie Schwartzlager. And there is a website, www.katiecat.us, if you'd like to get some more information for donations. Obviously, it's a bit of an expensive thing for her family to have her attend that particular training session. There will also be some future fundraising events, so if the community could just pay attention to our local websites and Facebook pages, there should be some additional information coming out. Hopefully the community and the school district can get behind this young girl. The fact that she was one of 12 girls selected at age 15, invited to Lake Placid, and also would like to commend the administration and building principal in order to work out via Skype and other means for her to continue her education here in the district, although physically she will not be here. I think this is obviously a once in a lifetime thing, and once again we have a student who seems to excel in the athletic field and probably be great. I believe it's 2000. Forgetting the switch every 2 years between Winter and Olympic. If it's not the 18 Olympic, it would be the 2022. So congratulations to Katie Schwartzlager and her family. Wish her the best, and thank you.
Mrs. Karan. Mr. Gillette. Mr. Lumia.
I have a few comments. Just the way I went, just last hour said, I'd like to thank the teachers, not only for getting those things, but also for unloading the trucks and then separating it with diligently prior to board retreat from that side. Also want to acknowledge Trustee Slashauer, who made a very constructive comment during one of our meetings that board, to a board announcement, to a public announcement by the part of the board, something should be said about the committees. I commend you, so that was said, being that I'm the chairman of the Capital Improvement Committee, and very rarely do I give a report, I would like to say it's not that I want the public to know that all Capital One projects have been completed. The only thing left in regard to the Capital One projects is the punch list to make sure that it was completed. Regarding the Capital Improvement project that we recently approved, we're in the process of developing schematic, not us, but the architects are in the process of developing schematic designs, such as the athletic fields, elevators, the schools, blacktopping, bathrooms, windows. It's important for the public to realize that it takes, the state is almost 30 weeks behind approvals. So even though the architects submit these things on time, they quite a long time before they get addressed. I'd also like to thank Todd Mensch. As you all know, Mr. Todd Mensch was the department head with Mike Walsh while I was here for 13 many years. The Department of Math, Science, Technology, and Business. We're taking that position in another district. This district will definitely miss his services. And as I simply hope that whoever we hire for that, he's an expert, at least an expert in math, science, and technology, and business. And hopefully we'll sell for it in less than that, which is just a too important position. Not to get to I'd also like to let you know that a lot of charters were approved that they made it, hopefully tonight. That's it.
This is good.
Buried in all the paper that we get for these meetings was an application for an overnight field trip And I'd like to compliment the originator, Mary Beth Boylan, and the Proscenium Club for budgeting scholarships for students who cannot afford the field trip involved. I really applaud their planning and foresight in making sure that all students have access to a really good trip. So thank you.
Mr. Rubin.
Mr. Lumia and Mr. Slashauer, we all attended, myself as well, were at 2 meetings of the Capital Improvement Committee. So there were a number of committee meetings that we were there. I was there with Paul, with Barbara, I was at the Mid-Hudson Study Council Law Conference, but I represented BOCES at that one. I found that a fascinating conference. Attended the Public Relations Charter Committee meeting, the Strategic Planning Committee meeting, Summer Law Conference up in Albany for NISBA, Wellness Committee Charter meeting, the Capital Improvement Charter Committee meeting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lumia, for mentioning the committees, and Mr. Sloshower for recommending that we have committee reports. As board president, I'm ex officio on all these committees, and I've been to a great many of these district and board committees. You should know that the board has been working very hard since the last board meeting, and all of the committees have met and created charters, elected chairs, and gotten to work on the work for the coming year. And so it was, they didn't just take off for the time between the last board meeting and now. So they've been busy with many, many meetings. All right, and we have a number of charters which we will be approving tonight.
And you're to be lauded, by the way, for attending those committee meetings.
Oh, thank you, and you too, Mr. Rubin. We have some members of the board who have attended lots and lots of meetings because they volunteer for a great many committees. You heard Mr. Rubin, Mr. Lumia has volunteered for many, many committees, and everyone on this board has been attending committee meetings, so they've been busy. We also today had a board retreat to go over some of the board procedures and try to better accomplish our work during the year and see if we can do a better job. Right? We're always looking to improve this. As was pointed out to us by the facilitator, the poor boards are those who will think they're already perfect and their district is perfect, so never look to improve. And the ones who want to keep striving are the ones who do and accomplish something. All right, the superintendent's report, Mr. Carrion.
Good evening. What I'd like to share with everyone is that we did submit for our Education Law 3012D, our APPR. There are no hardship waivers. We're waiting to seek approval. We do have one thing that we can actually submit for. From our past presentations, and we will have more formal presentations regarding APPR and Education 3012D. But I just wanted to give the board a quick heads up that as we shared in one of our formal presentations that regarding the independent evaluator, how one must be from the school that share the same VETS code, and an administrator must be from the school, and then one must be an independent evaluator that comes from somewhere in the district or a consultant that we may pay to help us with this work. We can actually put in for the waiver, and we will still try to continue that practice so that it's not abrupt for the following school year, to try to have someone from the school to conduct one observation and someone that's not from the school to conduct the second observation whenever possible. It gets a little difficult with our elementary schools, but overall we submitted for that extension not to have the independent evaluator, which is part of Education Law 3012D. So that's my report, as well as just, I tend not to repeat what other board members have already indicated, but there was one piece that I want to share about the teachers today. Dr. Bonk, Rich's head, also Dr. Cardwell, could not go. They were willing to go, but they were really tied up, always the day before a board meeting. I pretty much dragged Kristen along. She was fine to come along with me. And on the way back from working with the teachers, and first of all, they found it extremely surprising to see that central office came and worked and got our hands dirty working with them and labeling the books. But in addition to that, what was great was to see what exists within the teachers in our school district. Retirees and present teachers just working together, laughing together, and really trying to pull this whole effort. How many books? 21,000 books.
Wow.
21,000 books. And here we were just all working together, having a great time. And those of you who know our WCT president, how much he likes to have a good time while doing this work. So he did have us laughing and running around and taking pictures. But it was really, really good to see the entire WCT, and what I mean by that is retirees and active teachers. And they were really kind and paid Kristen and I great compliments for being there and helping out. Thank you.
Could I ask, are they through, or do they need more help tomorrow?
I don't know the answer to that question.
No, they got some more to do yet.
They do?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe we'll...
21,000 books, a lot of books.
We could get over it. Teachers were sweating, running around. We were pretty drenched too, Kristen, right, by the time we left.
Yeah, I asked, since the board was pretty occupied with our board retreat this afternoon, if they're still working tomorrow afternoon, maybe some of us could lend a hand then.
Volunteer.
What?
First thing in the morning.
When?
8:30, I got a medical appointment.
Well, just
My
so
eyes
that-
will be dilated at 8:30.
So that you all understand too, this was that our president of our teachers union called me Friday evening and said, ooh, I should have really sent the invitation out to everyone. And we called our PR person, and that's when we received the invitation from Miss Amy Watkins. At that point, we had sent, Pasquale asked if I would extend the invitation to the board and also to the central office administrators and the administrators in the school district. So right there, that Friday evening, that's when you all received the invitation at that last minute. So if you're available tomorrow, according to Mr. Barras, we may just be there helping out again for a little while.
7.01, Board of Education Goals.
No, because we didn't, that's okay. I would make the recommendation that, as we move forward, we put this information together. Is this also where there's the resolution? Why am I at 8.07?
Because we're on 7.02.
No, I know, that's what I'm saying.
This is the resolution
Right,
they'll
so
be
resolution
available
put it
after
together.
29.
It's to put
Yes.
it together.
That's really, so where we get the clippers together. So for the next meeting, so what we're requesting is, and especially when we had our meeting today, for the board to grant the president and the vice president to work with me to create the draft of all the submissions so that we can get it to you, and also provide, as we spoke today, in terms of information, presentation, workshops, so on and so forth, so we can try to lay out a draft calendar and have a better guide to then developing our goals at the next Board of Education meeting.
So then we're not going to be getting to vote our preferences on the different goals submitted by board members?
No.
No, I just make a suggestion that
That's how it's-
7.01, we pull that 7.02 and wait until next time.
Okay.
No,
No, we have
Has
to
to be
approve,
7.02,
we have to approve we have to approve it in order for them to compile it.
and then you'll be voting on it.
Right. And then we'll be reviewing it, discussing it, and voting on it at the next board meeting.
Right.
Okay, so it's a different procedure than what we used last year.
That's
what I-
What's the distinction?
Mrs. Kelly.
Well, last year, people all submitted different goals, and we voted on them with, Mr. Lokema projected them, and we voted on them with the clickers as to which are priorities. And then after that, Mr. Carrion and I got together and compiled them at that point. And then we came back and voted on what we had compiled, and we put in the ones that had the higher, you know, that a lot of people seem to give priority to. Yes, so, yes.
All right, yeah, I think we should vote on 7.02.
All right.
To draft.
I'm sorry,
Wait
I
a
still
second.
don't understand what the difference is between what we did last year. Are we going to be voting and rating each of the individual goals? So you guys are just putting the table together?
Yes.
And I guess my question is, why do we need to vote on putting the table together this year when we didn't vote the table together last year?
Last year when we voted well, this is my response, but when we did it together, it was part of the board agenda setting meeting with the president and I. We're requesting now that the vice president, I think because there's two people, and just making sure that before receiving the information, and quite frankly, I didn't want to say this, we've been asking repeatedly for goals, and last year we had a much better and quicker submission to be able to create it. Alberta's making that face, she's like, that's right. So overall, you know, it did really change things a little bit, but nevertheless, it's just the idea of being able, as we set the agenda, to be able to map out and just draft it out and ensure that it doesn't come back at the next board meeting and say, where did this come from? But that the board was okay by taking all the information compiled and having Mr. Rubin and Ms. Collin and I, as the president and vice president, just putting it all together. Nothing that we're deciding, but just really kind of mapping it all out, putting it all together, and you will receive it this Friday in the weekly memo review.
Mr. Galetta.
I think the discussion agenda item is constructive, it's productive. I think one of the reasons in trying to formulate board goals or submit proposed board goals, you know, I tried to do some research, I tried to see what else was out there, and kind of what I found was a lot of board goals seem to be very, very general, very vague, almost a duplication of a long-term goal in terms of, we already have a strategic plan, right? A mission statement, strategic objectives. So I don't think it's necessary for us to submit board goals that is a long-term plan. I think board goals are designed to be more of, you know, we do them yearly. I think they're designed to be more of things that we can focus on within that particular school year that supports the board, supports the strategic plan. Something that's a little more focused. So, you know, I was happy to see this on the agenda. I think it's just a short discussion on what actually makes a board goal, a good board goal, is worthwhile. Because some of the board goals, I look at the ones from last year, and all three board goals from last year are excellent goals in terms of things that we want to accomplish. But really, you could take, you know, 2016, 17 and plug them right into those board goals, because if we still want to accomplish those things in 17, 18, I'm sure we're still going to want to accomplish those things. So I guess I was just wanted to have a discussion of maybe providing the superintendent with a little more focused direction for board goals for this particular school year. Now, having said that, I also think that it's already the middle of August, right? And the superintendent and his team have already started, you know, planning for and preparing for the upcoming school year. So in my mind, I think the board really should start to be thinking about the next year's goals, maybe in you know, certainly the May timeframe, starting to talk about them in June, and so that the superintendent can take those goals as part of his direction and work on that over the summer in planning for that next school year. So we may be behind the 8 ball a little bit in preparing board goals for this year already. so to speak. But I just wanted to have some of that discussion. If maybe nobody else feels that way, I'm not sure, that's fine. But those are some thoughts that were on my mind.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Goodman?
Yeah, I had a question because originally it was my understanding that we were supposed to use the board retreat on August 30th to discuss goals. And now you're saying we're supposed to vote on it
That's not a
the
retreat
29th.
topic. Not a retreat topic.
You can't discuss board goals in a retreat.
You can't discuss.
How did you arrive at the goals this past year? When you voted with the clicker, was that at a public meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, board members all submitted 2 to 4 goals, and then Mr. Lokema compiled them all in a list, and we were asked to rate them, I think 1, 2, 3, or 4, as to how much of a priority we thought they should be. You could give as many 1s or as many 4s as you wanted, and as he flashed them up there, we each hit our little clicker and recorded our score, and everybody could see it, and it should be in a public meeting. And then afterwards, Mr. Carrion looked at those, and those that had fairly high scores, which about 2/3 of them, we sat down and we compiled them and matched the things in the strategic plan that were part of those goals. And we put them under 3 headings, which were communications, financial, and curriculum instruction. And then we brought it back, and then the board voted on the whole thing. So that's basically what happened.
What I can suggest too is that if you can resubmit, because I think today's conversation and the retreat was very informative, and I think even, for the board, maybe looking at it from different lenses. So I really, for example, the 3 goals that we have, as President Callen indicated, curriculum, communication, and financial, those are 3 topics. What tends to happen is that many times we get the indicators to support those aspects. So after today's conversation, understanding the difference between board and administration, how is it that the administration team is going to support those goals? So take, for example, even a conversation, because this is not private information that was discussed, it was just your retreat. But if you looked at communications, that suggestion that was made was to have quarterly board short retreats to maintain improved communications. So that would be an indicator under the communication goal of the more umbrella topic for the board. Based on that, there would be indicators that come from the superintendent, as I suggested, and I have been suggesting since last year, that quarterly forums for the public to be able to come and have conversations and not have to utilize the Board of Education meeting to have some real in-depth conversation of some of the issues that are affecting education today. So that's an example.
And we also, at the same time, Mr. Cavarion and I looked and saw what workshops where they would come in, and which workshops would be appropriate to match up to try to discuss those indicators and present them to the board and to the public, so that we could see if we're making progress on them. If these were things that were concerns, indicators that we'd like to see, then he planned presentations, workshops related to them, as well as the ones that are required by law. Yes, Mr. Gallant.
So I guess the indicators that you're talking about, I guess I would look at them more as the more focused board goal for this specific year, and I guess that would be what I would be looking for as the board goal for this year, whether there's 3, 5, 7, whatever. I mean, it looks like there's about 9 of those indicators total from last year. I guess what I'm saying, if we're going to put the effort into making board goals, I think we should have those specific indicators that can be measured this year and see if progress is being made. So if that's how we're gonna do it, with the indicators being the focus part, that's fine. But I would see that as being the goal itself for this year.
Yeah, well, we called them board goals when we were going up with our clickers, but they basically turned into the indicators. So those indicators that you see under the goals were those things that were submitted as goals by the board that got the highest number of priority.
I just, we want to be careful that we don't have too many indicators where we're creating too many goals. Obviously, you know, there's only so much you can do in one year.
True.
Okay.
Yes, Mrs. Pelton.
I would just like to thank Mr. Gletta for his comments, and I think that from our retreat today, and some comments from you, Ms. Kellen, that always moving forward and trying to improve. I like the idea of really, as we're going to submit these, not looking at something on such a broad feature and or a broad spectrum, and really trying to articulate. And, for example, and I'm not saying this is an exact goal, but instead of communication, we talk about improving communication, but what does that really mean in a given year? Does that mean, can we set a goal of having 4 town meetings? Can we set a goal of 2 town meetings? What is achievable? But I appreciate those comments, and it's nice to have something that you can check off your list in a year's time and be successful at.
Any other comments, questions? All right. 7.02, approval to draft board goals.
Resolved that the Board of Education of the Wappinger Central School District does hereby approve the board president and vice president to compile the board goals into categories of curriculum and instruction, financials, and communications upon submission of goals from board members. Be it further resolved that the draft board goals will be supplied to the full Board of Education on August 19, 2016, and presented for discussion and approval by the Board of Education at the August 29, 2016 meeting.
Motion? Mrs. Pelton, second. Mrs. Farrar. All those in favor?
Discussion, just real quick.
Discussion?
I'd like to make an amendment for the August 12th to be changed to August 19th.
I read it as 19.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, if we were going to meet, Mr. Carignon, you wanted us to meet this Wednesday, so maybe it better be by the 17th.
Absolutely.
Then-
Oh, no, that's to make sure that it's submitted to them by the 19th.
Yes, but if you wanted to, you said that in your weekly memo, you would have the board goals out this
Right.
week.
He will. We have to meet beforehand.
Yes, but we have to meet beforehand.
Right.
You know, if we have the ones from the board to compile these, we would need them by the time we meet.
Yes,
So if we're
Wednesday.
meeting on Wednesday, the 17th,
We'll send
the
some-
board
a reminder
members
out
need
tomorrow.
to send them to us by
Perfect.
Wednesday morning so that we're able to actually meet and look at them, include what you want.
We will send that tomorrow.
Okay. Right. Okay, so then it was amended to the 19th, all right, okay, second to the amendment? Mr. Lumiere, all in favor of the amendment? Okay, unanimous? All right, now we'll vote on the actual motion unless there's further discussion.
Just for the record, I
Yes.
didn't need the amendment because he read it correctly as the 19th.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't need the amendment.
Oh, all right, fine, thank you. All right, then all in favor of the approval to draft board goals? Unanimous.
Right?
9.01, approval of refunding bond resolution.
No. We've discussed that. As stated.
We did the consent agenda.
We're on 9.01, approval of refunding bond resolution.
A resolution authorizing the issuance pursuant to section 90.00 or section 90.01 of the local finance law of refunding bonds of the Wappinger Central School District, Dutchess and Putnam Counties, New York, to be designated substantially school district refunding serial bonds and providing for other matters in relation thereto, and the payment of the bonds to be refunded thereby as stated. Thank you,
Kristen.
Alberta.
Thank you. Kristen, could you explain very quickly to us all exactly what that entails?
This 9-page document, Kristen.
In the past couple of weekly memos, I've tried to give you an overview as to what this refunding is. It's bonds from 2007, 2008, 2009 that they're not callable. I always get asked if bonds are callable, but these are eligible to be refunded, and that their interest rates are so varied as to what we can get at this time and due to our current credit rating and the market. So the opportunity for the district to refund these 3 bonds, roll them into one offering, will save the district approximately $180,000 over 23 years. So it seems like a long time, and it is a long time, but it is being fiduciary, fiscally responsible as a matter of practice.
That would be almost $5,000 a year savings, right?
It's more in the beginning, tapers off towards the end. But again, they being capital markets, brought it to our attention and said, this is something we can do because we can roll these 3 together.
Thank you. Any other questions? All those in favor?
I don't think I got the motion.
Oh, we didn't get a motion. We're so sorry. Motion, Mrs. Pelton, second, Mr. Lumia. All those in favor? Unanimous. 9.02, approval of member participation in a cooperative pricing system.
We should do this every year. Eventually, we'll have to pay nothing. Whereas the NJSA, excuse me, Mr. Lumia?
You gonna read the whole thing? Are we required to read the whole thing?
Whereas the NJSA 40A 11-11-5 authorizes contracting units to establish a cooperative pricing system and to enter a cooperative pricing agreements for its administration. And whereas the Education Services Commission of New Jersey, hereinafter referred to as lead agency, has offered voluntary participation in cooperative pricing systems for the purchase of goods and services. Whereas on August 15, 2016, the Board of Education of the Wappinger Central School District, County of Dutchess, State of New York, duly considered participation in a cooperative pricing system for the provision and performance of goods and services. Now therefore be it resolved as follows. Titled, this resolution shall be known and may be cited as a cooperative pricing resolution of the Wappinger Central School District Authority, Wappinger Central School District Authority, pursuant to the provisions of the NJSA 40A 11-11-5. The superintendent of schools is hereby authorized to enter into a cooperative pricing agreement with the lead agency. Contracting unit. The lead agency shall be responsible for complying with the provisions of the local public contracts law, NJSA 40A 11-1, et seek, I guess it is, and all other provisions of the revised statutes of the state of New Jersey. Effective date, this resolution shall take effect immediately upon passage.
Okay, motion. Mr. Sloshower, second. Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Crandall.
The reason why we're looking to this New Jersey cooperative is specifically related to a service that we cannot find in New York State. Mr. Bros has a room full of blueprints and plans. We have not been able to find a vendor in New York State that could meet our needs. And it goes deeper than just scanning and storing and searching and archiving and making sure that we can find these documents as needed. There's a company in New Jersey that is a part of this cooperative. After more research, we found that there are other opportunities there, whether they be professional development, whether they be the textbook inventory system that we're going to be looking into. There are other areas that we can work into. New Jersey's cooperative agreement, it does not cost us anything. We do try to stay local. We use our local bids first, but if they don't work or we can get a better price and they're more responsible, we definitely need to look and be efficient and fiscally responsible.
Okay. Any questions, comments, discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. 9.03, PTA Council Representative. Isn't there just one, Mrs. Pedro? It's, I see an S.
Yeah, and then alternate we had last year.
All right, okay, all right, yes, okay. We need a representative and we need an alternate.
I nominate Mr. Schleichauer to be a representative.
Wait.
I nominate Mr. Helmy as the alternate.
All right.
Because then I will be there.
All right.
And no alternate.
Okay, excuse me, why don't we start with volunteers? Who would like to be the representative to this, to the PTA Council from the school board?
Mr. Schleichauer told me he was gonna volunteer.
Excuse me, yes, let's start with, and Mr. Rubin has been the council representative before, so perhaps he can tell you a little about it so that you will be more excited about volunteering. Thank you. It's a really great organization, it really is. I went to a couple of their meetings, it was very interesting. One on heroin, the heroin epidemic, and one on open meetings law. Yes, Mr. Rubin.
I would just like to say to anybody, please volunteer for this. The PTA Council is a great organization. You will meet with a lot of parents from the various different schools. I was on it last year, however, I will say that being on the Dutchess County School Boards Association and also being the Dutchess County School Board's representative to the Dutchess County, excuse me, I am on the Dutchess County BOCES. So they meet, and I am also their representative to Dutchess County School Boards Association. That takes up a lot of time, and I believe the PTA Council meets on one of those dates, so I cannot be in both places. I think it's a worthwhile organization. It will not take a lot of your time, and it is something the PTA Council values your input to let them know what is happening at the school board level. Please volunteer for that.
At our retreat today, it was suggested that that it's a good idea for school board members to find out about things they have not been familiar with or active with in the past. So they was suggested by the facilitator that it might be a good opportunity for someone who has not been active in the PTA, but of course someone who has been is also, quite willing to, quite eligible to represent us. So we need a volunteer and an alternate. Yes, Mrs. Pelton.
Could you tell me how often they meet?
Mr. Rubin.
Yes.
Oh,
I actually can, because I had a conversation with the PTA Council towards the end of the school year, and we're noticing that there's decreased involvement, and nothing negative because the level of participation is still strong. It's just that social media has played such a big role in terms of communicating to local PTAs as well as the PTA Council. So one of the things we talk about only every other month. So that's what I was trying to get in there. We're not going to be meeting, we'll be meeting at most 5 times, and really working to really come up with some great topics so that parents can come out and feel like, oh, it's not every month. And so we're excited about that. We're excited about the fact that we won't get parents out every month.
I would like to say that I think it's an amazing organization, and I know that it was the suggestion that it not be someone who's been involved before. However, if I could get someone like Karen perhaps to do it with me, I'm pretty sure we could cover 5 meetings.
Okay.
I'll be
And
real
dinner.
good.
Okay, okay.
I'd be willing to be Tracy Salter.
Well, thank you so much, that's excellent. And I know Mrs. Pelton and Mrs. Carab will be very good representatives because they have had a lot of experience with PTA and youth activities in the district prior to their board membership. So, okay, then would you make a resolve?
Yeah. Did we say that Mrs. Pelton?
Mrs. Pelton as the primary board representative and Mrs. Carab as alternate board representative.
Resolved that the Board of Education does hereby appoint Trustee Pelton to serve as the primary board representative to the PTA Council meetings for the 2016-2017 school year, and be it further resolved that the Board of Education does hereby appoint Trustee Carab to serve as the alternate board representative to the PTA Council meetings when the primary representative is unable to attend.
Okay. All right, do we have a motion?
I'll motion.
Mr. Rubin, second. Mrs. Goodman, all those in favor? Mr. Rubio. Unanimous. Congratulations, and thank you very much, both of you. 9.04, New York State School Boards Association Annual Convention 2016.
Resolved that the Board of Education does hereby appoint Board President Peggy Kellen to serve as the voting delegate at the annual NYSBA annual convention in Buffalo on October 27th through 29th, 2016, and be it further resolved that the Board of Education hereby gives full discretion to Board President Peggy Kellen on voting the attention of the board after hearing discussion and amendments on the convention floor.
Do we have a motion? Mr. Lumia, second. Mr. Galetta. Just to reassure everyone that discretion, before I go to the convention, we go over all the resolutions with the board. They give me their feelings. And in the case of amendments on the convention floor, which often happens, I try to vote as closely as to their intent as possible. That's why the discussion is so valuable, because amendments can change the resolutions quite a bit, either to more of what we wanted or to something that we don't want. Okay? All those in discussion? All those in favor?
You're going.
Yeah, Mr. Galetta, Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Goodman, Mr. Rubin, Mrs. Karanth, Mr. Sloshower, Mrs. Pelton, Mrs. Kellen. Opposed? Mrs. Laval? 9.
You're going.
Yeah. I'm trying to find out which is cheaper, Amtrak or driving. I don't get your money. 9.05, approval of charters.
Resolved that the Board of Education of the Wappinger Central School District does hereby approve the charters for the 2016-2017 school year as recommended by the respective committees. Capital Improvement Committee Charter, Legislative Action Committee Charter. Excuse me? Okay. District School Safety Committee Charter, Wellness Committee Charter, Personnel Committee Charter, Professional Development Plan Charter, Long-Term Development Committee Charter, which is renamed from the Strategic Planning Committee, Community Communications Committee Charter, which is renamed from the Public Relations Committee.
Okay. All right. Do we have a motion? Mr. Lumia, second. Mr. Rubin. Discussion? Yeah, we're looking for the copies of the charters. We don't see them.
They're all in here.
Not everyone's signed it.
No, that's not it. I was asking for something different.
Everybody able to find this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're in the back.
Okay, everybody has it? All right. Okay. Discussion.
If I may,
Yes, there's none. Mr. Carrier?
yes, I sent some information about the Personnel Committee Charter, and by all means, I shared that in the weekly memo review. I think that placing exactly how it will work in terms would not really be conducive. And I can give you a concrete example. When Mr. Lumia and I, my first year as superintendent, we had to conduct, as the superintendent along with the other committee members, we came in on a Saturday and conducted a interview with the candidates for a principal position. The point that I'm making, I completely agree that if the wording could just indicate differently so that it indicates that the personnel committee is not involved in the first process or to the selection of any of these candidates or to the interview process. I think that's really the gist that I was reading when this committee charter was written, because it basically kind of really ties our hands to just ensuring that it only happens one way. And in addition to that, in terms, and especially after today's retreat, that indicating that the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources and Labor Relations, in addition, an additional member of the central office staff and a building administrator may temporarily participate in the committee interview process. That's really administrative to decide who will be participating in terms from in district during the process. However, I'm not negating and I'm indicating that the personnel committee, in the event that whatever the process may be that we take on, that they're not, the personnel committee is not part of the first process.
I don't think there was the intention. I think there should be 3 stages. Stage number 1,
Right.
stage number 2, stage number 3. Stage number 2 is the personnel committee. And the personnel committee has been formulated in the past and worked rather well. It had 3 board members. It also had an administrator. It also had from central office. And I believe it had the human resource person was also on that committee. And I think there was another person, I'm not sure where.
So what you're asking is that we follow the process that many administrators who have been administrators longer than I have indicated that it's not really the greatest process to follow at all times. So what I'm asking is that that's an administrative component of the level of participations and the different degrees in the conversations that we've had. I'm not indicating at all to say that we tried a process, and I know that it didn't work out to the degree that we wanted it to work out, but that a process for an interview can change, and sometimes does change, and sometimes can even take into account an emergency that may occur. But overall, that if there is, that the personnel committee would definitely be involved in the administrative component of the interview process. So the administrative component can be with me, can be, because it's not always, to have a rigid process is not always realistic to think that that's the way it's going to happen. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So I'm not, I find it somewhat to say, yes, I agree, we're having a personnel committee, but I'm not sure if telling me how the interview process will take place is really that's what's being indicated here.
Mrs. Pendleton.
I just want to ask if 2 changes might help you achieve what you want to achieve, and I don't know where the committee will fall on it, but I'm wondering if this committee is to interview candidates for the positions, if we had an amendment that said committee is to interview candidates in phase 2 for the positions of, so we have in phase 2 written in there, and if it sounds like you don't want the administrative team specifically designated.
Well, that's one thing, because different things call for different people, but I think more so is to really indicate that the personnel committee will be involved with the administrative component. So what I'm trying to get at is that, for example, sometimes we start off with teachers,
and community members, and that could be a process. So that when you're called in, it could be where it could be Dr. Bonk, it could be Dr. Cardwell and other administrators, so that the personnel committee is part of that administrative phase.
So would this execute that if we had in phase 2?
So it wouldn't matter the phase per se. So for example, take when Mr. Zip was hired, that they went to one room, but they came to another room, and the room that they came to for those interviews were the administrators. So
Where's
where's
where is the board members' process? To me.
And the administrative process.
No, I think it should be, to me, I think it should be independent of the administration. We as a board should have a very important say as to who
That's
we'd
what
like
I'm
to
saying.
bring forward to you.
No, that's what I'm saying, in the administrative process. So you would be.
What about if it's prior to the superintendent recommendation?
Well, that's what I'm trying to say, but prior to is with the administration. That's what I'm trying to get, so you would be involved with the administration.
So you would be okay with that
Yeah,
working
that's
prior
fine.
to the superintendent recommendation?
Say it again, what do you, say it again, please?
Personnel committee is to interview candidates prior to the superintendent's recommendation.
Mr.
Or with
Rubin.
administration.
Oh, Mr. Rubin.
But as I understand it, this is a charter, this is a general overview of what the committee is gonna do. The actual operating procedures that the committee will establish will be established by the committee, and that committee then could talk about these types of operational issues as to at what level, at what point they're gonna come in. I don't believe that that type of an operational level of detail belongs in a charter.
Again,
Mr. Lumi.
as stated, the purpose of the personnel is to interview candidates for the position of principals, district director, or member of the central senior staff,
Right.
and provide feedback to the superintendent on each candidate. I think as it's stated, it's well defined.
Oh, the first paragraph is well defined.
The superintendent is the final authority. The composition of membership, okay? Is that where the problem comes in? The personnel committee consists of 3 board members appointed at the annual meeting, an assistant superintendent of human resources. Now, there's a problem with that. If you as a what do you call it, the superintendent thinks that you should not be there, I mean, I have nothing against it.
Right.
But I think there should be somebody from central.
No, absolutely, that's what I'm indicating. The composition or membership, the personnel committee would be with the administrative process. I'm empowering that, but it may not always be Dr. Bond. It could be me. It could be the
I don't
entire
want you.
COS staff.
You're the ultimate decision maker.
Yeah, but what
You
I'm
should
trying to
be
get
part of
at,
that process.
Mr. Lumia, there are times when you have to do what you have to do to make sure you bring someone in. So what I'm trying to get at is, and or the administrate, but it's always the administration. You would not be, the personnel committee would not be, you get what I'm trying to say?
What if Dr. Bunk is gone? What if he's away? What if, you know, to have,
For the most part, it's the COS staff, that the personnel committee would be involved with these folks here. That's all I'm trying to get, and not labeling one or specifically one person.
Okay, I think Mr. Galetta and then Mrs. Lamont. Mr. Galetta.
Rather than trying to maybe amend the charter right here, right now, I'll just throw this out as a suggestion. If we referred it back to the personnel committee to reconsider what district personnel are included in the charter, as well as reconsider board involvement.
Point of order, you can't do that.
Okay,
Point
that's
of
fine.
order, you can't do that. You have to make a motion to amend what we have here. There's a resolution on the table. So if you
I
want to
understand. That's
amend
fine.
that, to bring that back, you can do that.
Isn't it possible also to
You can
table
refer-
this charter?
You can table, you can refer to a committee, you can amend.
We would have to amend.
Yeah.
We'd have to
You
amend the
can
resolution.
refer
Amend the
a
resolution.
motion to
Amend the
amend.
That's what you
resolution
need to
charter.
put forth if
Yes,
you want.
yes.
Okay.
Okay,
You wanted to refer
would
to a
you like to
committee,
do
you
that, or
can
should we
do
want to hear these people?
Let her speak first.
Mrs. Lamont?
I just want to clarify what the concern is. this kind of discusses how the interview process will take place. What we really want is a group of people who are going to come together as a committee and decide, contingent upon what the position is, what the makeup of the interview committee is going to, what the interview is, structure is going to look like. Am I correct on that? We're talking about the committee coming together to decide the process?
No, what I'm saying is the composition for me is that the personnel committee would be a part of the central office staff administration. Whether it includes one person or two people, it doesn't matter, but that they're at that level, the personnel committee. So the personnel committee would not be, I hate, for terms of hierarchy, I don't like using, but it wouldn't be where the teachers
right, the building administration
and middle management, for lack of a better term, it would be where they are part of the central office administrative phase. So whether that is a third phase or a second phase or a fourth phase, they're a part of the central office at the administrative phase. That's what I'm trying to get at. And as long as that's clear, then you're heavily weighing in with the senior staff. That's what I'm trying to say. So if there's even if we're doing things simultaneously, you're sitting with senior staff. You're not going with another committee.
Right, but we're not deciding that right now. We're not deciding what the layout of the interview process is going to be.
Well, it does the composition.
I'm asking if that's not what you're looking to take out. That the committee is going to come together and decide what any particular interview process is going to look like with the senior administration. Do you see what I'm asking you?
It sounds like we have some significant language changes, though,
So Tracy,
in the composition. It's so that we would take out, I think Superintendent Carrion wanted to take out the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Labor Relations, and that whole section that refers to adding temporary staff to the process. So what if we had composition/membership read, the Personnel Committee of the Board of Education consists of 3 board members appointed at the annual organization meeting who will become part of the central administration interview process as appropriate.
That sounds good.
Who from time to time, because this committee does not convene on a regular basis. It convenes as it's needed. Correct?
Okay, Mrs. Pelton.
I would like to, as I see heads going in both directions, I'd like to make one other suggestion, and if we aren't at terms with the suggestion, maybe we can table it and the committee will meet again for another charter. My suggestion is similar to Ms. Kratz. It's to change the wording to Personnel Committee of the Board of Education consists of 3 board members appointed at the annual organizational meeting and designated senior central office administrators.
That works for me.
Fine.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And sounds good. So here, all right. Do we
But
have?
we as a board decide
Do
who
we
that's
have-
going to be.
Do we have a second?
I still have a question. Is this committee involved in setting the interview process, or are we just coming to be part of the administrative interview process? That's my question. What is this committee charged with doing?
According to what we heard today, it would be that they would be in charge of coming to the interview process. We're the administration. We would create the process, but what we're ensuring is what Tracy just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like, oh, I came into the first level process, that we're ensuring that the personnel committee is in the central office staff level of the interview process.
Mrs. Pelton.
I'd just like to clarify, Mr. Carrion is not suggesting the first paragraph change. Unless I'm misunderstanding, he does not want specific people identified as to who has to be there. So if we eliminate Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Labor Relations, in addition, an additional member of central office staff and a building administrator, if we eliminate that and say senior central office administrators, then they have the authority to determine who will participate with us.
Mrs. Phelps,
That's
would
fine.
you
I
make
go
the
with that.
motion
I'd
to
like to make
amend
a-
the charter?
I'd
Yes.
like to make a motion to amend the Personnel Committee Charter
As stated.
as stated.
A second, do we have a
So
second?
moved. Second.
Mr. Rubin seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? All those in favor? Unanimous. Were there any other changes that you felt were necessary?
No, I just
Karen?
wanted to empower the board that's gonna be in the personnel committee even more.
Thank you.
So now.
All right.
To ensure that they're with
Right,
seniors.
yes.
If I may, then, what we're now talking about, the resolution with the only change being the Personnel Committee Charter as amended.
As amended, yes. Do we need
Is
to read?
Is that okay?
Is that all right? Very
Do you
good.
need that,
All
Alfred?
right. All those in favor of the approval of the charters? Unanimous.
Another comment. I'd like to thank all the people participating in the various charters.
It was a lot of work, and the board,
Everybody got
all
them done
board.
within 2 weeks, all the charters.
Right, within a short number of weeks, the entire board worked on committee after committee, creating these charters. And thank you to the central administration, who also helped in sometimes facilitating the meetings, sometimes drafting trial charters for us to look at, and looking things up and doing research, Mrs. Pedro and a number of other people, thank you. 9.06, approval of professional development plan 2016-2018.
Resolved that upon recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby approves the Wappinger Central School District's Professional Development Plan, PDP, as mandated by Commissioner's Regulation, I guess it's paragraph 102.2 I'm not sure what that is.
Okay, I just have one question before we move a second. I see here in the title here is Plan 2016-2018, but in the file attachment is 2016-2017. So which is it? Is it a 1-year or a 2-year plan? Could someone? Thank you.
The plan,
We can hear you.
The plan is generally a 2-year plan according to NICEAD. However, with the new regulations, we can update the plan every 6 months. But it is a 2-year plan.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Ask it.
Okay, well, you can ask questions.
It's not a question.
Okay, yeah.
Just because I was gonna bring that up. It's just there's some inconsistencies within the documents on date. Some documents say it's for 16-17. So does that make a difference if you're saying it's a 2-year plan when some of the content is only for 1 year?
The plan was written for a typical 1-year plan. The state does say we could do it for 2 years. We did it for 1 year, so we have the option of revising it at the end of this year.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have a motion? Mrs. Pelton, second. Mr. Lumia, discussion, questions. Mrs. Goodman.
I have a question about how you define professional learning communities.
Professional learning communities is something that we are working on in the district to define ourselves. Professional learning communities is an opportunity for our staff members to work together as a group on a particular goal. So there would be a group of staff members, could be teachers, could be teaching assistants, could be administrators, that are discussing a topic that they are all concerned with and want to discuss and be able to grow and develop and to enhance instruction and student learning.
Okay, because I'm not seeing in your meeting times and meeting venues any place for those PLCs.
Currently, the district has common planning time. We sometimes refer to them as PLCs, but by definition, they are not true PLCs. So we are providing professional development to our teacher teams and changing that common planning time and that discussion period to actually be professional learning communities where we grow and we discuss student growth.
The reason I'm bringing this up is that I don't want a really good thing to be ruined by jargon and mislabeling. I was fortunate enough to work with a teacher who was a Fulbright scholar who studied in Finnish schools. So she was able to bring the Finnish model to our school. So I both worked on a PLC and then I facilitated them. They have very specific requirements of teachers in terms of their time. And in general, those kinds of requirements mean that teachers need to get paid. So what I'm seeing is a use of the word without the substance being planned for. And I just wonder if there's some way to address that, to be more specific about how you're planning to develop these professional learning communities.
Well, we have two school buildings that have committed to receive training on professional learning communities. Based upon those two school buildings and professional development that they receive, and then turnkeying that information, we will create a definition that is common with the Wappinger Central School District. So that will be our definition, not going by any of the education gurus and their definition. Definitely using that model and the premise that it's based on, but really creating a definition that meets the needs of the Wappinger Central School District. So we're starting off with those two schools that have committed to developing professional learning communities, and then the professional development team will continue to meet, continue to develop, and then refine what that looks like in our district.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Discussion? All those in favor? Mrs. Pelton, Mr. Sloshower, Mrs. Karat, Mr. Galetta, Mrs. Delumia, Mrs. Goodman, Mr. Rubin, Mrs. Kellen. Opposed? Mrs. Laval. 9.07, adoption of Algebra 1 textbook.
Resolved that the Board of Education does hereby approve the textbook adoption of Big Ideas Algebra 1 as indicated in a memo dated July 25, 2016, from the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction to the Superintendent of Schools.
Motion. Mr. Lumia, second. Mrs. Pelton, discussion.
I reviewed the book. I came here to actually look at the textbook, and I found it very, very friendly, user-friendly, excellent graphics, very good word problems. I like the fact that students is given directions as to the process to a problem. I like the fact that students are encouraged to do an error analysis of questions. I think it's very, very good. It's excellent, I think. I wish I had it.
Professional evaluation, thank you. Yes, Mrs. Pelton.
Just curiosity, what prompted the change?
The change came from the switch to the Common Core algebra curriculum, and we needed a textbook that was up to date and met the needs of our students.
There was not a textbook before?
They had an outdated textbook.
Thank you.
This is really good, regardless of Common Core otherwise. I think it's excellent for any kid who's going to pursue algebra as well, go to college. Excellent. Excellent book.
Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor? Unanimous. 9.08, approval of local assistance plan, Wappingers Junior High School.
Resolved that the Board of Education of the Wappinger Central School District approves the New York State mandated local assistance plan for implementation at the Wappingers Junior High School for the 2016-2017 school year as recommended by the Superintendent of Schools.
Motion? Mrs. Melton, second. Mrs. Karan? Would you like to give a brief explanation, Mrs. Carver, Dr. Carver?
Yes, the Wapiti Junior High School was identified as a school needing to create a local assistance plan. What you see before you is the plan. We are required to list activities that will help support the growth of students. Many of the activities that are listed are items that we discussed during the 15-16 school year as needing to get implemented regardless of the LAP. That consists of enhancing the RTI program, using a universal screener and additional data sets to help inform instruction, as well as adding in additional academic activities either before school or after school.
Questions, Mrs. LeBlanc?
Can you give us some of the criteria for why this school was identified as needing a local program?
We
Yes,
can.
we can.
Mr. Okima also has some information. Let me just indicate that we had an opportunity, and we took advantage of the opportunity to actually indicate that we didn't believe with the status of Wappingers Junior High School becoming an LAP school. We've had other schools in the district prior to Wappingers Junior High School that was an LAP school. For example, Van Wyck Junior High School several years ago was identified as a lab school where they also had to write a very extensive, it was my first year here, where Dr. Shukat had to write with his team a very extensive plan. That is something that we may want to look at and continue to address because we believe we have legitimate reasons not to be identified as a local assistant an LAP school. And it's a bit hard to take on all of this data when we have such a high test refusal rate. And how accurate is the information that you're providing us with to create this identification? Mr. Lokima and Dr. Cardwell worked together to put to submit why we shouldn't be identified as an LAP school. They rejected our refusal, but what I'd like to indicate maybe is that a resolution can be passed that maybe we can draft some type of letter that goes out to the State Education Department indicating that we did submit a refusal, we did submit an appeal, and we believe that our appeal was legitimate and that we do not agree with the identification of Wappingers Junior High School being an LAP school.
Could you explain for everyone's benefit, exactly why we were so designated aside from the test
Yes, and that's where Mr. Lokima is going to provide us with that information.
Yeah, there was.
I was buying time, so you could load it up.
I'm sorry. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, Mr. Carrion was helping.
We're all ready. We've been ready for this question.
There were several. The state uses a complex formula that identifies, adequate. It's basically adequate yearly progress, or it looks at benchmarks that were set and where they made. They call them progress indicators, or performance indicators rather. And if you miss on so many of them, then you will get cited. You can miss on 2 or 3, no problem. But if you miss on 5 to 7, then you got a problem. So we had a category. We had one category that said, there was a subgroup that failed to make AYP for 3 years in a row, 12-13 through 14-15, and that was for white students on the science assessment, grade 8. There was another subgroup where we missed our performance index, where we had a measure. We missed on in ELA students with disabilities, ELA black students, ELA Hispanic students, ELA economically disadvantaged students. We missed on math students with disabilities, grade 8 science students with disabilities, grade 8 science, white students, grade 8 science, economically disadvantaged. All the ELA assessments and the, as Mr. Carrion already indicated, the participation rate was abysmal for the assessments, and there was different, I have a whole document that goes along with the appeals, which I'm sure was shared with the board, I can send it again, that really just outlined why we didn't feel that their rationale for the progress target should be considered relevant, and in some cases I found their data to be flawed. But like Mr. Carrion said, our appeal was still declined.
So what I can share with you is that even 15 years ago when I was a building principal and we were already dealing with the New York State School Report Card and not meeting adequate yielding progress with certain subgroups, when you look at Wappinger Junior High School and you see all of the subgroups, that right there should let the state education department know
That it's flawed.
do we not see a problem here? Like we're but I guess they didn't go for it. But we can definitely talk about, and I can write in a weekly memo review about something that could be sent to the state if that is the direction that the board would like to go as a resolution that's passed with a letter indicating that we did provide you with a legitimate appeal.
This is allowed. I would just like to say, I told you so. This is the essence of why I first addressed this board. This is the heart of my concern with the education reform, with the assessments, with the APPR rating system, with all three pieces of legislation that were passed in New York State when they adopted the education reform. It was deliberately set up to put schools in a situation of not being able to do what they need to for their students, to make locally appropriate decisions based on what we know about our students. They set us up for this, and here we are caught in it. It's very plain. This is exactly what everybody who's been crying out against this reform has been saying. The assessments are not valid and reliable. They don't give us the authentic analysis of how our students are doing, and now they're going to come and tell us exactly what we need to do in order to respond to the accusation that they've made, which we don't necessarily believe is appropriate. As far as this plan and response, it still talks about getting 95% of students. It says the U.S. Department of Education requires that 95% of students in each accountability group is responsible, must participate in the state's annual reading and language arts and mathematics assessments. That's not true. The districts are mandated to administer the tests, but we can't force anybody to take the test. If we could force anybody to take the test, it wouldn't be opting out. They're allowed not to take it. And so they set us up and put us in a position where we were not going to be able to meet the requirements that they said we needed to. And now they're going to come back and punish us for not meeting the requirements they set us up not to be able to meet.
Mrs. LaBelle, would you like to make a motion that we send a resolution to that effect?
I just want to make clear that the participation rate has been in existence since the year 2000. So that's not the participation rate.
This learning system plan has been in effect for many, many years. Dr. Shuker, I believe, his school was because of people, specialized students, they were not specialized students who passed a certain test. I believe that was your school, or maybe John Jay.
They were making the changeover from the old test to the new test.
It was a John Jay, I guess it was. This is something that existed long before Common Core, so I don't think that, maybe they are setting us up, but this has been consistent for many, many years.
Well, I think when you have the number of test refusals that we have,
of course,
regardless of the criteria that the state education department has developed, it doesn't put us in an equal playing field because we're not playing with the whole deck of cards.
We need 95% in the schools.
Excuse me?
Did we need 95%?
No, we didn't mean 95%.
But we
weren't
still
cited.
have
He is talking
validation
about
of
doing
the
that.
assessments, that they're valid and reliable. So even if we had participation rate, we don't know that the assessments are giving us a true, valid and reliable analysis of how the students are doing. And while the assessments have been in place, APPR, with the consequences, came in with the education reform in 2010. It hasn't been around forever. No Child Left Behind has been around for quite some time, and the accountability has, and the annual improvements have been in place, but the consequences and the rating system haven't. They're new, and they're a new set of shackles that are being put on the districts, and which make us truly just caught in this net of, if these numbers don't work, we're going to penalize you, and we're caught where we are.
Mrs. Goodman.
Okay, I have a question. And pardon my ignorance about the district in some of these questions. First of all, is Wappingers Junior the only school right now on an LAP? Okay, so the feeder schools, the elementary school, the groups for the feeder elementary schools into Wappingers Juniors, they're fine, right? The high school, which would be Ketchum, yes, that's fine. So what basically happens is in 7th and 8th grade, the teachers get lousy and the kids get stupid. Well, no, I know that. What I'm saying is that it seems to me that I actually think that an appeal letter should be done, because there are extenuating reasons why that, and the fact that the schools on either side of it with the same populations are doing just fine, okay, says to me that there may be something wrong in how the state is looking at the school. All of a sudden, a kid goes from making adequate progress in 5th grade and 6th grade, and all of a sudden he's not? I mean, the problem, there are two problems here. Number one, I think, is the high percentage of opt-outs. You don't have legitimate data. And I really do think that until Dr. King's, I think he's a doctor, isn't he? Yes. Until his proposal for regulations requiring 95% participation or punishing the district, until that comes into place, and I hope it doesn't, then the opt-outs seem to me to be a legitimate argument. I also think that it's a legitimate argument to look at the schools on either side of the feeding pattern. As for setting the schools up for failure, Mrs. Lavelle, I absolutely agree with you. That is exactly what the state law is designed to do. It is not because they want to remove local control. It is because they want to pave the way for things like charter schools and break unions. At least the APPR has now been removed from student results until I believe it's 2020 now in New York State. 2019 or 2020?
The 1920 school year.
What?
The 1920 school year.
Okay. So I think that we should fight it when it's unfair. I think it's worth investing the time. I think that we now have a legislative committee that may need to lobby our legislators and members of the State Education Department with members of the administration. I would like to make a motion to actively fight, and I don't know how to say it, so you guys have to help me, to actively fight this designation.
I believe they're gonna send
We
a
did.
letter.
Well,
They
You did already.
already did already, so we're gonna actively fight.
So what is the status of that appeal?
It's gonna be heard.
Mayor?
It's gonna work.
It was denied.
Yes,
That's
Mr.
what-
Rubin.
That's what we said. I think we're all in agreement on that, and when it comes to member additions, item 10.0 on this, I'm gonna put forth a resolution that the board authorize the superintendent to send that letter.
That's where it goes different. It's not for the superintendent. The superintendent already sent the letter, I appeal. So the board, now speaking in terms of the board and governance, in terms of indicating that the superintendent wrote a letter appealing this process and provided, and we do not.
The board, then instead of the superintendent, I would say the board president.
Okay, yeah.
Then I would like to make a motion.
Yes,
That
this is good.
you let Mr. Slashow or Mrs. LaValle, you're gonna kill me. But I would like to move that the legislative committee draft a letter to the state education commissioner and the board of regents and copies to our legislators, our state senator and our state assembly women. And we present it to the board, you wanna say within 30 days? Give us time for at least one meeting?
We wouldn't have anything scheduled till the end of September for the purpose of first meeting. Unless you want to amend that and ask the
Well, I think
attorneys to draft.
the charter that's being approved says if necessary more frequently. I think this isn't if necessary.
We want to hold, but then again, we still don't have the full committee.
That's right, I apologize, that's right, we were
We
gonna
haven't
ask for
approved tonight.
community members and.
Ms. Pedro has to put up a notice for participant. I mean,
Okay, well, okay, I'm sorry.
I mean, I think it's definitely something that we should address immediately.
Well, let's get the committee fleshed out first, I agree, I agree.
And if we have it sent in 30 days or 45 days,
I agree.
is it gonna
No,
make a
your point is
difference?
well taken, I absolutely agree.
Mrs. Belton.
I'd like to make a motion that
Okay, hold
when we.
on. She would need to withdraw her motion.
Yes, she already made it.
And I would just like to say,
Mr. Rubin.
that, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I just don't see it, but listen through this charter that we approved. I don't see that we granted the committee the authority to send correspondence out to our legislators.
We have to draft it, it has to come back to the board, it's approval. So that letter that we draft has to come back. as an agenda
That's
item.
correct, that's what I was saying, that we have it ready to present to the board. So then I would like to move to amend my motion, is that how I do it?
Yes.
Okay, which is that,
Or you can amend it or withdraw it, whichever you please.
all right, okay. I would like to move, all right, let me withdraw my motion, and let me present a new motion that the legislative committee become fully constituted, and that its first order of business to be to draft a letter from the board to be sent to the state education department, the commissioner, the head, all the regents, including the regent from our region, all of the state legislators involved, and the governor, okay, as soon as the committee is fully constituted, to be presented to the board, to the full board, for their vote and discussion, so that we can pursue this matter.
I'll say that.
Seconded. Any discussion? All those, Mrs. Belton.
Just quickly, could we add, a date to have the letter completed by?
That'd be first week after September 30th.
What's the,
It has to be after we have a fully constituted, that's why it's.
which is not gonna happen until September.
So, would we say prepare by our November board meeting?
Sure.
So you get 30 days.
Sure,
That way
absolutely.
we'll have a second meeting. So let's say by the first board meeting of November for board review, discussion, and possible.
Absolutely.
So,
Go ahead.
Would that have to be in addition to the agenda to make that motion? Aren't we talking about whether we're approving the LFP right now or not?
unless we amend it to say that at this point, that we cannot approve the plan. As a result.
Okay, Mrs. Pedro, Would this be, does this have to be done later as an amendment to the agenda?
I'm not quite sure of the process, but I do know that might be a good point. I think we do have a motion, the original motion on the floor, and I think that has to be dealt with. And then we can do the addition to the agenda at the end with this motion. I believe that's the safest way to do it.
All right, fine. All right, apparently, are there any other questions about this plan that we are required to approve? Mrs. LaBelle?
Is promoting participation in state assessments a necessary component of the plan? Talks about mandates that don't exist from the federal government. It talks about parents being unaware of how to interpret state assessments. It's asking how are you going to convince parents to have their kids take the tests. I don't necessarily think that those are the appropriate responses to this situation. I think the tests are flawed. That's the reason we have the opt-out. So I don't necessarily think advertising better to parents that their kids should take the test is the way to go. So I'm wondering, where did he come up with this? Is it a mandated portion of the plan, or is it something else?
Part 3 of the plan is the templates. If you look at the questions that are asked, none of the questions are completed. This says to be completed only by the lab schools with subgroups identified solely for the failure to meet the 95% participation rate on state assessments. Even though our district did not meet the 95%, we were not cited for participation rate. We were not required to complete this section of the lab plan.
Okay, so we don't have to respond to these questions?
Correct.
Okay.
So are there any other portions of that document that we're not having to respond to?
No, the only sections that we completed, we identified our strengths, our barriers, our obstacles, and our action steps that we will take. Those are the only items we needed to complete, and those are the only items completed in the document.
Okay, thank you.
Madam President,
Mr. Rubin.
you have this on the agenda for 5 minutes, so I think we've met that 5-minute time period. We need a motion, in my opinion, we need a motion to extend beyond this right now.
Okay, all right, does anyone want to make a motion to continue discussion? Mrs. LaValle, so moved. To continue discussion. Second? Seeing none, it's time to vote. All right, all those in favor of approval of the local assistance plan for Wapatos Junior High School? Mr. Galetta, Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Goodman, Mr. Rubin, Mrs. Durant, Mr. Sloshower, Mrs. Pelton, Mrs. Kellen. Opposed? Mrs. LaValle. 9.09, first reading of policies. 4322, 4325, 4326, 4340, 4350, 4410, 4430, 4510, 4511, 4513, 4524, 4710, 4740, 4750, 4770, 4771, 4780, 4810, 4821, 4850, 9241. First reading, and if anybody has any questions, they'll find them on the website. You're welcome to submit questions or to the district about it. And if any board members would like
I suggest you address
to
the
Mrs.
issues
Belton,
to the chairman of the
excellent.
policy.
Policy Policy Committee, so please submit them to Mrs. Belgian, board members, so please check them out. 10.01, board members may request additional agenda items, discussion items, or requests for information. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Mrs. Goodman.
I would like to amend the agenda to add a resolution. What? As stated before.
Okay, all right.
Second.
All right.
So this is just a motion to amend the agenda?
Yes, and we had a second from Mr. Rubin, okay? All right, discussion on the motion to amend the agenda. All those in favor, Mr. Galetta?
First of all, I would like to see that in writing. I would like to, so I can, and to be honest with you, personally, I have an issue with, I guess.
Okay, excuse me, but we're just amending the agenda to allow her to submit a resolution, and we'll do the motion. I know, it's very confusing.
I thought she was adding it.
No, that's
additional
okay.
item. I'm
It's
sorry.
very complicated.
No problem, no problem.
Took us all a long time to figure it out. Okay, all right. All those in favor of amending the resolution, the agenda to permit Mrs. Goodman to submit a resolution? Unanimous. All right, Mrs. Goodman.
Okay, I think what I had said was that I would like to vote on a resolution asking the legislative committee to develop a letter to be sent to appropriate state authorities regarding their decision to place Wafforders Junior High School, or opposing their decision to place Wafforders Junior High School, to need a local action.
Do you want to put a date on that?
Yes, the draft will be delivered by the first board meeting in November to allow for the full legislative committee to be constituted.
All right. Seconded by Mr. Rubin. Discussion. Mr. Galetta.
Yeah, I would just say as a general rule, I'm not in favor of, I guess, voting on something that is brought up as an agenda item without prior notice, without some time to review, especially, unless it's a very time-sensitive issue that really needs to be done at this meeting. Otherwise, I would prefer that this be put on another, maybe next agenda at another meeting. I'm not in favor of that.
Mr. Slowshower.
Let's say just in terms of just for a quick compromise, if we're gonna vote on that, and let's have something that we want to see put in writing for the next board meeting, and give you time just to write something up and submit it. You
Can I amend that motion?
And do that if you prefer to see something in writing, why don't you just prepare it and then submit it to Peggy,
Absolutely.
excuse me, to Madam President, Mr. Rubin, and the Superintendent, and we can look at it, touchy-feely, and then, since we have time.
Mrs. Bell.
I'd like to make a motion to table it so that we're able to see it the next agenda.
Sure.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay,
Who was
the
the
second
second?
one, we
Who
need a
was the
second.
second?
I'll second.
Mr. Slowshower, I see, I saw his hand. up.
We all second.
Yes, all those in favor of tabling it to the next meeting? Okay, unanimous?
Send that to Peggy.
And we'll provide everyone with the appeal file on more information for the everybody so that you can see what has been submitted, and that way you have some content to start with.
11.01, comments from the public. Again, if there are any members of the public who would like to speak, you have 3 minutes. You may speak on anything that is related to school district business.
Hi. Sorry, it took me a little while to digest. part of the COC is involved, I feel that recess is required for all children to thrive. If children are being held back from recess, this can often intensify the problem which has caused the child to be held back from recess. As well as continued, it causes a child, if it's continued being held from recess, it causes a child who's constantly being held back to be alienated from their peers and singled out. I speak of that from having it happen to one of my children. And that was only because she wasn't finishing her work on time. She's a perfectionist. Also, as far as recess is concerned, why do we not have lunch monitors out on the playground with the children, supervising them? This would give the teachers an opportunity to have that talk with the children that they're keeping in for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, to talk about their behavior and how it can be rectified, or even better yet, still being able to have that conversation with the child, making it personal, not as a disciplinary action that they're in trouble for something to start off with. But it also gives the teachers an opportunity to take a breather for themselves, as well as maybe sit back in the classroom with a child or two who's struggling on something and offer that extra help, because there isn't any. There's no extra help available for children who need that time. And if the child is willing to stay in from recess to try and catch up on something that they're having issues with, I think the teacher should be able and be available to them at that point in time. And we have lunch monitors. Why not use them for recess? I know that's when I was in school, way back when, the lunch monitors were up there with the kids. It's a lot for teachers to have to monitor so many children that are running on a playground. That's just my 2 cents. And the last thing is, if it's at all possible, can we make these meetings go a little faster when school actually starts? Because 10 after 11 at night for the working people is a little rough. So that was it. That's just my point. Is the recess is very important to these kids, to let them be kids, to let them exert their energy, and kind of give them a chance to recoup and thrive in the classroom.
Did anyone else wish to speak? Seeing no one, could we have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Lumia?
Mr. Lumia, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second. Mrs. Laval, all those in favor?